I'm Liz, and by some twist of fate, I'm married to the most amazing guy I've ever met, Alex. We're both 28, living in our own place, paying our bills, and building a life together. It's been a year since we said I do, and things have been great. Except for one small issue. Alex's parents. Don't get me wrong, I didn't expect to be the perfect daughter-in-law. But I also didn't think I'd feel like an unwelcome guest. The first time I met my in-laws, it felt like I was walking into a lion's den. My mother-in-law, Jane, gave me this look as if she was trying to decide whether I was a bother or just boring. I could tell she had already judged me before I even said hello. Alex had warned me about his mom on the way there, saying she can be a bit much, but don't take it to heart. I tried not to, but it was tough. During dinner, as I was passing the salt, Jane said, Stephanie used to cook such wonderful meals. Remember that risotto, honey? She asked Alex, who just nodded with a tight jaw. Yeah, I remember, he replied without looking at me. I sat there with the salt shaker in my hand, feeling invisible. They all talked about Stephanie like I wasn't even there. It hurt, but I forced a smile and said, sounds like she was a great cook. Jane smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, she was. She was a lot of things, she said. That night, I told Alex how I felt. It's like she's comparing me to a ghost, I said. Alex hugged me and said, you're the one I chose, Liz. That's all that matters. I wanted to believe him, but as I would soon learn, Jane had her own plans, and I was just a piece in her game. I just didn't realize it yet. Living with a food allergy isn't just inconvenient, it's like having a constant reminder of danger. Since I was a kid, peanuts have been my worst enemy. It all started with a spoonful of peanut butter and a trip to the emergency room that made it clear, keep me away from peanuts and a bunch of other foods if you want me to stay safe. It's not just peanuts though. Soy, peas, cherries, almonds, tomatoes, apricots, bananas, and even potatoes are off limits. It's a list that makes waiters raise an eyebrow and friends think twice before inviting me over for dinner. It's also a list that my mother-in-law, Jane, knows by heart, yet she somehow questions it every time we're over for dinner. Are you sure you can't even have a little bit of this pie? It has almond extract, she asked, sounding concerned but also doubtful. I'd smile politely, even though I'd rather not, and say, yeah, I'm sure. Thanks though. It was the same routine every time. I remember one family gathering. I was going through the buffet line, trying to remember what I could and couldn't eat. Alex was next to me, helping me find safe options. That's when Jane appeared with a sugary smile and said, Liz, you have to try this casserole. I made sure it's Liz-friendly, but the look in her eyes didn't match her sweet tone. Alex paused with his fork and asked, Mom, you use cream of mushroom soup in this, right? He knew many brands include soy, which I can't have. Jane's smile slipped for a moment. Oh, I think so. It should be fine, she said, but we both knew it wasn't. I left the casserole untouched, making excuses to avoid eating it. The incident stuck with me. It felt like a small win in a battle where Jane had the upper hand because she controlled the kitchen. Navigating my food allergies has become a careful process. Eating out is like a strategic mission. Alex and I were at our favorite Italian restaurant, one that understands food allergies well. I gave my usual list of what I couldn't eat to the waiter, and Alex watched me with those caring eyes of his. Are you okay? He asked after the waiter left. Yeah, I'm fine. I just hate making a fuss, I replied, folding my napkin. You're not making a fuss. You're making sure you don't, die, he said, half joking, half serious. I laughed, feeling grateful. After dinner, as we walked under the clear night sky, I felt happy. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Jane. Her message was like a dark cloud over the night. Be careful, Liz. Not everyone takes your condition seriously. Wouldn't want anything to happen to you. I read the text from Jane to Alex, and he put his arm around me, pulling me close. She's just trying to get to you, he said, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's message was more than a cheap shot. It felt like a warning. It was a reminder that my allergy made me vulnerable, not just to food but to people like her who might see it as a weakness to exploit. As we walked home, I kept thinking about all the close calls and accidental exposures I'd had. It wasn't just about peanuts, soy, or peas. It was the realization that my allergy was a crack in my armor, and Jane might see it as an opportunity. That thought was scarier than any allergic reaction I'd ever had. Dinners at Jane's house always felt like a performance where everyone knew their role except me. I was the wild card who might cause a scene with just one bite. Alex tried to make things better, but there's only so much you can do when you're in someone else's house. One evening, the tension was as heavy as the gravy on the table. Jane was bustling around, placing dish after dish on the table. I sat there with an empty plate, trying to figure out what I could eat without ending up in the hospital. Jane said, "Alex, darling, pass the green beans to Liz. They're just divine." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes didn't match. I looked at the green beans, but something seemed off. "What's in them?" I asked. "Oh, just a touch of almond slivers for crunch," she said, waving her hand dismissively. I raised my hand to stop Alex from passing me the green beans. "I can't eat those." "Remember, almonds are a no-go for me," I said. Jane feigned surprise, putting her hand to her chest. "Oh dear, I must have forgotten." Silly me. Alex stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Mom, this is serious. Liz could end up in the hospital." His frustration made Jane's eyes narrow slightly. "I just wanted to make something nice," Jane said. "It's not my fault Liz has all these allergies." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The other relatives looked around, forks paused in midair, unsure where to look. I felt my face flush with embarrassment, feeling the unwanted attention. Alex's dad, Mark, tried to ease the tension. "Let's just enjoy the meal. There's plenty Liz can eat." But the damage was done. The rest of the dinner was filled with strained politeness, with Jane asking pointed questions about my allergies as if she were taking notes for next time. Later, when Alex and I were alone, he apologized. "I'm sorry, Liz. I should have double-checked everything before we came." I shook my head, tired of feeling like a problem to manage. "It's not your fault, but I'm starting to think your mom does this on purpose." He didn't answer, and he didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Jane seemed to serve up a side of malice with every meal, and I was the main course. I could always tell when Jane had been working on Alex. He'd get this distant look, as if he was looking at me, but also looking through me, weighing her words against his own judgment. That evening it was like a cloud had settled over him. I knew something was up before he even spoke. "Mom thinks we should." "Well, she thinks we might not be thinking about the future enough," Alex muttered, not meeting my eyes as he fiddled with the TV remote. "The future?" I asked, feeling a sinking sensation in my gut. "Yeah, you know kids and your health issues," he said, the word issues hanging awkwardly between us. I felt a tightness in my chest. "She talked to you about my allergies again, didn't she?" He sighed and set the remote down. "She's just worried, Liz. She thinks it's a lot for us to handle, especially if we want a family." I bristled. "We've talked about this. I've managed so far, haven't I? And there are plenty of people with allergies who have kids." Alex ran a hand through his hair, a sure sign he was stressed. I know. It's just that she has this way of making me doubt things." The room was quiet and the tension was thick. I watched Alex, the man I loved, struggling with the seeds of doubt his mother had planted. "Alex, do you doubt us?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked up, his eyes clear and firm. "No, I don't. I just hate that she keeps bringing it up. I hate that it makes us fight." I reached for his hand, our fingers intertwining. "We're not fighting. We're on the same side, remember?" He nodded and pulled me into a hug. "You and me against the world, right?" "Right," I said. But as I held him, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's words were like weeds, threatening to choke the life out of the beautiful thing we had. I realized it wasn't just my allergies that needed managing, it was the doubts that could creep into even the strongest relationships. When we found out I was pregnant, it was a surprise. A happy one for Alex and me, but a complicated one for everyone else. The day we told his parents, Jane's reaction was like watching a robot trying to mimic human emotions. There was a pause, then a smile that didn't quite fit the situation. "We're going to have a baby, Mom," Alex said, his voice full of pride and caution as he watched her reaction. "That's wonderful," Jane said, her words sounding foreign. "We must have a family dinner to celebrate." I was skeptical. Celebrations at Jane's were never just celebrations. But seeing the hopeful look in Alex's eyes, I agreed to go along. On the night of the dinner, the house buzzed with relatives. Jane played the perfect hostess, moving gracefully from guest to guest with a charm that almost seemed genuine. When she reached us, her smile was practiced. "Congratulations, Liz," she said. "This is such a joyous occasion." "Thank you, Jane," I replied, trying to match her formality. We're excited. Alex wrapped his arm around my waist, a silent thank you for playing along. As dinner approached, I felt the familiar anxiety. A table full of food was a minefield for me, but tonight I hoped it would be different. The table was a feast, with dishes piled high. I felt every eye on me as I hesitated, my hand hovering over the options. Go on, dear, Jane urged. Eat up, you're eating for two now. I smiled weakly and chose the safest options, vegetables and rice, plain and simple. But as I reached for a slice of bread, Jane stopped me. Actually, maybe not that one, she said quickly. I'm not sure if the baker used soy flour. I paused with the bread in hand and met her gaze. Was that a flicker of concern or a challenge? Thank you for letting me know, I said, putting the bread down. But the warning bells were already ringing in my head. How did she know about the soy flour? It seemed like too close a call, too perfect a save. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of congratulations and clinking glasses, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's hospitality was just a veneer, hiding a trap set for the right moment. The family dinner in honor of our future baby was nothing short of a banquet. Jane had outdone herself, with a spread that would make a Thanksgiving dinner look modest. But my stomach was in knots, not from hunger, but from fear. Every dish was a potential hazard, a hidden enemy that could send me to the hospital or worse. As we all took our seats, the chatter around us continued, but my anxiety never eased. The table was lively with the usual family gossip and stories. Jane sat at the head, presiding over the feast like a queen. She tapped her glass gently to call everyone's attention. Before we begin, I just want to say how thrilled we are to be celebrating Liz and Alex's upcoming addition to our family, Jane announced, her voice steady and clear. The room erupted with cheers and applause. I forced a smile as Alex squeezed my hand under the table. Thank you, everyone, I said. We're really looking forward to this new chapter in our lives. As the meal started, I cautiously picked at my food, choosing the simplest items. Alex watched me with concern. You doing okay? He asked quietly. Yeah, just being careful, I replied, pushing a roasted potato around my plate. Jane's eyes were on me, making me feel like a specimen under a microscope. Liz, you haven't touched your salad. The dressing is on the side, just as you like it, she said, her voice tinged with forced cheerfulness. Thank you, Jane. I'm just not very hungry tonight, I said, avoiding the salad that might contain hidden allergens. As dinner went on, the tension grew. Every time Jane offered me something, my anxiety spiked. The room felt hotter, the walls closing in with each minute. Then came the cake, a beautiful confection of layers of sponge and cream that made everyone ooh and ah. Jane cut a slice and handed it to me with a smile that might have seemed genuine if I didn't know better. For the mom-to-be, she said, offering me the cake. I looked at it, then at Alex, then back at Jane. I really shouldn't, I said. But it looks delicious. Oh, come on, Liz. One little bite won't hurt the baby, Jane pressed, her voice as sweet as the icing. That's when Alex's dad, Mark, stepped in. With a swift motion, he knocked the plate from my hands. The cake tumbled to the floor, and a stunned silence fell over the room. What the hell? Alex exclaimed, his voice a mix of anger and confusion. Mark stood up, his face pale but firm. I saw the label in the trash. That cake has peanut oil in it. The room erupted into chaos. Jane's face was a picture of shock, but her eyes betrayed her with a flash of something, fear or maybe guilt. Alex stood up, his chair clattering behind him. Mom, did you know about this? He demanded. Jane's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. In that moment, the truth was as clear as the danger that had been on my plate. The room was dead silent after Mark's revelation. The dropped cake lay on the hardwood floor like evidence of a crime. Everyone's eyes were on Jane, who seemed to shrink under the collective gaze. Mom, is it true? Did you know? Alex's voice cut through the tension, sharp and demanding. Jane's eyes flickered with something dark before she regained her composure. Of course not. I would never, she said, her voice trailing off unconvincingly. I could feel the eyes on me, waiting for me to break down under the weight of Jane's words, but I didn't. Jane, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. You've made your feelings very clear, but this isn't just about me. This is about a family, your grandchild. Jane looked away, her jaw clenched. For the first time, I saw a hint of fear in her eyes. Maybe she realized that her actions hadn't just endangered me, but also her relationship with her son, her reputation, everything. The rest of the evening was a blur, arguments, tears, and hushed conversations as the family tried to process what had happened. Alex and I left early, the weight of the night heavy on our shoulders. We didn't speak much on the drive home. What was there to say? The truth was out, and with it, the facade of a polite, if not happy, family was shattered. All because of a peanut. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that's heavy with unspoken words. When we finally walked through our front door, Alex and I just stood there, the echo of the night's drama still ringing in our ears. Alex was the first to break the silence. "I can't believe my own mother would do something like that," he said, his voice hollow. I sat down on the couch, the cushion offering little comfort. "I know it's a lot to take in," he said, sitting beside me and taking my hands in his. "I'm so sorry, Liz. This is unforgivable." I looked at him, seeing the pain in his eyes, and my heart ached. "It's not your fault, Alex. We couldn't have known she'd go this far." But the truth was clear. Jane had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The family was in pieces. Some stood by us, shocked and appalled by Jane's actions, while others struggled to grasp the reality of the situation. The next few days were a whirlwind. Alex's phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from relatives wanting to express their shock, support, and apologies. Through it all, there was a deafening silence from Jane. No apologies, no explanations, nothing. A week later, Alex told me the news. "Dad's left her," he said. "He can't get past what she did. It's been a long time coming." I wasn't sure how to feel, relief, sadness, or pity. "And Jane?" I asked tentatively. "She's not handling it well," Alex replied, a twinge of regret in his tone. "She's alone now." We sat in our living room, surrounded by the walls we'd painted together and the furniture we'd picked out during countless trips to the store. It was our home, filled with our memories and love. Outside, a storm brewed, threatening to uproot everything we knew. But in that moment, I realized that no matter what happened, we had each other. We were a team about to bring a new life into the world, and that was what mattered. "I love you, Liz," Alex said, pulling me close. "I love you too," I whispered back. The fallout from that night would linger, and the scars it left on our family would take time to heal. But as I looked at Alex, at the life we'd built, and at the future we were about to embark on, I knew that we'd weather any storm together. As for Jane, she was a chapter in our lives that we had closed, a story that wouldn't define us. From now on, it was just us, our baby, and the road ahead. Whatever it brought, we face it together.
I woke up, my eyes slowly adjusting to the dimly lit room. The curtains were drawn, and only a sliver of sunlight peeked through. As I reached for the lamp on the nightstand, my hand trembled, a reminder of the arduous battle I'd been fighting against the ruthless illness that had ravaged my body. "Good morning, sweetheart," Graham's voice rang out, dripping with saccharine sweetness. "How are you feeling today?" I turned to see him standing in the doorway, a broad smile plastered across his face. By his side was Elliot, his son from a previous marriage, his expression a mirror of Graham's. "I'm feeling a bit better," I rasped, my throat still raw from the treatments. Graham's smile grew wider, and he exchanged a knowing glance with Elliot. "That's wonderful news, dear," he said, his tone laced with something I couldn't quite place. Elliot stepped forward, his eyes locked on mine. "Yeah, we're both so happy to hear that." He chimed in, his voice lacking the sincerity of his words. A sudden chill ran down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Graham and Elliot had been nothing but attentive during my illness, but there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't ignore. As I struggled to sit up, Graham rushed to my side, his hand resting on my arm in a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but felt oddly possessive. "Once she's gone, all this will be ours." "Elliot," he murmured, his voice low but carrying a weight that hit me like a ton of bricks. My heart dropped, and the room seemed to spin around me. The words echoed in my mind, their implication crystal clear. They were waiting for me to die, their eyes fixed on the prize, my hard-earned wealth and the boutique I had poured my life into. Tears stung my eyes as the crushing realization washed over me. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted with my heart and soul, was nothing more than a deceitful opportunist, and his own son was complicit in his schemes. In that moment, something shifted within me. The naivety that had once clouded my judgment shattered, and a new resolve took root. I would not be a victim, not in my own life, not in my own home. As Graham and Elliot turned to leave, their backs to me, I vowed silently that I would not go down without a fight. They had underestimated me, and I would make them pay for their betrayal. With a steely determination coursing through my veins, I knew that this was just the beginning. The battle lines had been drawn, and I would stop at nothing to reclaim what was rightfully mine: my dignity, my independence, and the life I had worked so hard to build. I couldn't bring myself to confront Graham and Elliot head-on, not yet. Instead, I decided to bide my time, to gather evidence and build my case against them. As I lay in bed, feigning ignorance, my mind drifted back to the early days of my relationship with Graham. It had all started so innocently, a chance encounter at a charity gala. Graham, a wealthy businessman, had been instantly charmed by my wit and confidence. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and before long we were swept up in a whirlwind romance. "Seraphine," he had whispered, his eyes sparkling with adoration, "you are the most remarkable woman I've ever met." Caught up in the heady rush of new love, I had been blind to the warning signs. Graham's excessive flattery, his constant need for validation, and his tendency to lavish me with extravagant gifts should have raised red flags. But I was too enamored, too eager to believe that I had found the partner I had been searching for all my life. It wasn't until after our wedding that the cracks began to show. Graham's once charming demeanor morphed into something darker, more controlling. He would belittle me in front of his friends, making snide comments about my business acumen or my fashion choices. "A woman like you should be grateful to have a man like me," he would sneer, his words cutting deep. Elliot, who had been a sullen teenager when we first met, quickly fell in line with his father's twisted behavior. The two of them formed an unholy alliance, united in their disdain for me and their insatiable greed. "Why don't you just sell that stupid boutique of yours?" Elliot had once sneered, his lip curled in contempt. "It's not like you're any good at running a business." I should have left then, should have gathered my dignity and walked away from their toxic influence. But I was too proud, too stubborn to admit defeat. As the years passed, Graham's financial troubles mounted, his businesses failing one by one. It was then that his true motivation became clear. He had set his sights on my boutique, the one successful venture I had built from the ground up. "Once you're gone, your precious little shop will be mine," he had hissed, his eyes alight with malice. And now, as I lay in my sickbed, the full extent of their depravity had been revealed. They were willing to let me die, to sacrifice my life for their own selfish gain. But I was no longer the naive woman they thought they could manipulate. The fire of determination burned within me, fueling my resolve to bring them to their knees. As I watched Graham and Elliot leave the room, their shoulders slumped in disappointment at my continued survival, I knew that the time for action was drawing near. They had underestimated me, and they would pay dearly for their mistake. With my newfound determination, I wasted no time in putting my plan into motion. I knew that if I were to take down Graham and Elliot, I needed to be strategic and gather irrefutable evidence of their misdeeds. My first stop was the boutique, the very business they were so eager to get their greedy hands on. As I stepped through the doors, the familiar scent of jasmine and sandalwood enveloped me, offering a sense of comfort and familiarity in the midst of the chaos. "Seraphine!" Leo, my trusted employee, rushed over, his eyes wide with concern. "What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be resting?" I mustered a reassuring smile, determined not to let my personal turmoil show. "I'm feeling much better, Leo. In fact, I've never been more motivated." His brow furrowed, sensing the shift in my demeanor. "Is everything okay?" For a moment I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. But then I remembered the unwavering loyalty Leo had shown me over the years, and I knew he deserved the truth. "Graham and Elliot," I began, my voice low and steady. "They've been plotting against me, waiting for me to die so they can get their hands on the boutique." Leo's jaw dropped, his expression a mix of shock and outrage. "Those bastards!" he exclaimed, his fists clenching at his sides. How could they do such a thing? I placed a calming hand on his arm, grateful for his unwavering support. "That's why I need your help, Leo. We have to gather evidence of their schemes, anything that can expose their true motives. His eyes hardened with resolve, and he nodded firmly. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. Over the next few days, Leo and I pored over financial records, invoices, and receipts, searching for any discrepancies or irregularities that could point to Graham's involvement in my business affairs. It didn't take long to uncover the first bombshell. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been siphoned from the boutique's accounts into offshore holdings under Graham's name. That lying snake, Leo spat, slamming his fist on the desk. He's been stealing from you all this time. I felt a surge of vindication, but also a profound sense of betrayal. The man I had once loved, the man I had trusted with everything, had been robbing me blind all along. But the evidence didn't stop there. We uncovered records of lavish vacations, expensive cars, and designer watches, all purchased with funds stolen from my hard-earned business. As the puzzle pieces fell into place, a newfound determination took root within me. I would no longer be the victim of Graham's greed and deceit. It was time to take back what was rightfully mine. With Leo by my side, I began to meticulously document every shred of evidence, building an airtight case against Graham and his conniving son. They thought they could rob me of my dignity, my independence, and my livelihood, but they had gravely underestimated my resilience. As I stood in the boutique, surrounded by the very business they had tried to strip from me, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. This was my legacy, my life's work, and I would fight tooth and nail to protect it. This on, and this held all the cards. Armed with the damning evidence Leo and I had uncovered, I knew it was time to take the next step. I needed to secure my assets and ensure that Graham and Elliot couldn't wriggle their way out of the consequences they so richly deserved. That's when I reached out to Marina, my best friend and a formidable lawyer. We had known each other since college, bonding over our shared ambition and determination to succeed in a male-dominated world. "Marina, I need your help," I said, my voice tense as I recounted the sordid details of Graham's betrayal. To her credit, Marina didn't flinch. She simply nodded, her eyes steely with resolve. "Say no more, Sarah. We're going to make sure those bastards pay for what they've done." Over the next few days, Marina and I worked tirelessly, poring over legal documents and financial records. She was a master strategist, finding every loophole and exploiting every weakness in Graham's carefully constructed web of deceit. "We need to revise your will," she said, her fingers tapping purposefully on the desk. "Make sure that not a single cent of your fortune goes to that snake or his weasel of a son." I nodded, my jaw set with determination. "Absolutely. They don't deserve a penny of what I've built." As we delved deeper into the legal intricacies, Marina's admiration for my strength grew. "You know, most women in your position would have crumbled," she remarked, her eyes shining with pride. "But not you. You're a fighter, Sarah." Her words buoyed me, reminding me of the steel that coursed through my veins. I was no longer the naive, trusting woman who had fallen for Graham's lies. I was a warrior, a force to be reckoned with. With Marina's guidance, we crafted an airtight strategy. Not only would I be protected from Graham's greed, but we would also set a trap, a carefully laid snare that would ensnare him in his own web of deceit. "He won't see it coming," Marina grinned, her eyes glinting with anticipation. "And when he does, it'll be too late." As the pieces fell into place, I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. Graham and Elliot had underestimated me at every turn, and now they would face the full force of my wrath. The day we finalized the legal documents, Marina raised her glass in a toast. "To reclaiming what's yours, Sarah. May those snakes get everything they deserve." I clinked my glass against hers, a newfound sense of empowerment coursing through my veins. They won't know what hit them. With Marina by my side, I knew that victory was within reach. Graham and Elliot had made the grave mistake of crossing a woman who was no longer content to play the victim. I was a force to be reckoned with, and they were about to learn that lesson the hard way. As I left Marina's office, my head held high. I couldn't help but smile. The tide had turned, and the predators were about to become the prey. It was time for Graham and Elliot to face the consequences of their actions, and I would savor every moment of their downfall. With the legal groundwork laid and my assets secured, it was time to move to the next phase of my plan, confronting Graham and Elliot head-on. I knew it was a risky move, but the thrill of finally taking control of the situation was too intoxicating to resist. It was a crisp autumn evening when I invited them over for a family dinner, playing the part of the oblivious wife to perfection. As they arrived, Graham's eyes lit up with a mix of greed and surprise. "Seraphine, darling," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Are you sure you're up for hosting dinner? You should be resting." I mustered a weak smile, determined to keep up the charade. "Nonsense, Graham. I'm feeling much better, and I wanted to have a nice family meal." Elliot shot me a skeptical glance. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "If you say so," he muttered, brushing past me into the dining room. As we sat down to eat, the tension in the air was palpable. Graham and Elliot made small talk, their eyes occasionally darting to the silverware and china, no doubt mentally appraising their potential value. Finally, as the main course was cleared away, I decided it was time to strike. "Graham, Elliot," I began, my voice steady and unwavering, "there's something I need to discuss with you both." Graham's brow furrowed, his mask of concern slipping ever so slightly. "Of course, dear." "What is it?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation. "I know what you've been up to." The silence that followed was deafening, the air thick with tension. Graham and Elliot exchanged a panicked glance, their faces draining of color. I don't know what you're talking about," Graham stammered, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile playing on my lips. "Oh, I think you do. The embezzlement, the offshore accounts, the fancy cars and vacations, all paid for with money you stole from my business." Elliot's fists clenched, his knuckles turning white. "You have no proof," he spat, his eyes blazing with fury. With a flick of my wrist, I produced a thick stack of documents, the damning evidence Leo and I had gathered. "I think you'll find that I do." Graham's face contorted into a mask of rage, his true colors finally revealed. "You conniving bitch," he snarled, slamming his fist on the table. "You think you can take everything from me?" I met his gaze unflinchingly, my resolve unwavering. "I'm not taking anything from you, Graham. I'm simply reclaiming what's rightfully mine." Elliot leaped to his feet, his chair clattering to the floor. "This isn't over," he growled, his eyes burning with hatred. "We'll make you pay for this." I couldn't help but laugh, a rich, mocking sound that only seemed to infuriate them further. "Oh, my dear boy, it's already over. You just don't know it yet." As they stormed out of the house, hurling insults and threats over their shoulders, I felt a sense of exhilaration coursing through my veins. The game was afoot, and for the first time I held all the cards. Graham and Elliot had underestimated me, thinking I was nothing more than a meek, submissive woman, but they were about to learn a brutal lesson. I was a force to be reckoned with, and I would stop at nothing to reclaim what was mine. The days following my explosive confrontation with Graham and Elliot were a whirlwind of activity. With Marina's guidance, we wasted no time in setting our legal strategy into motion. First, we filed for divorce, citing Graham's embezzlement and financial misdeeds as grounds for the dissolution of our marriage. The paperwork was airtight, backed by the mountain of evidence Leo and I had gathered. "He won't know what hit him," Marina grinned as she slid the documents across her desk for my signature. "By the time this is over, he'll be lucky to have the clothes on his back." Next, we turned our attention to the criminal charges. Graham's theft from my business, coupled with his blatant fraud and money laundering, was more than enough to ensure he faced serious consequences. As we sat in Marina's office, poring over the legal documents, a loud knock at the door interrupted our work. Marina's assistant poked her head in, her face pale. "Miss Cole, the police are here. They say they need to speak with you and Miss Westbrook immediately." Marina and I exchanged a knowing glance, silently bracing ourselves for the confrontation to come. Sure enough, two stern-faced detectives strode into the office, their eyes fixed on Graham's financials spread across Marina's desk. "Miss Westbrook?" "Mr. Westbrook," the taller detective began, his voice gruff. "We have reason to believe that you've been involved in a massive embezzlement scheme, siphoning funds from your wife's business into offshore accounts." Graham, who had been summoned to Marina's office under the guise of signing divorce papers, blanched visibly. "This is preposterous," he sputtered, his eyes darting wildly between Marina and me. I would never do such a thing. The detective arched an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by Graham's bravado. Is that so? Then perhaps you can explain these financial records? He slid a stack of documents across the desk, the very evidence Leo and I had painstakingly gathered. Graham's eyes widened as he frantically flipped through the pages, his facade crumbling with each damning entry. This is a mistake, he stammered, his voice quavering. These records must have been doctored. Marina let out a derisive snort, her eyes narrowed in contempt. Save it, Graham. The jig is up, and you know it. As the detective slapped handcuffs on Graham's wrists, reading him his rights, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication wash over me. The man who had once held so much power over me, the man who had sought to strip me of everything I held dear, was now being led away in disgrace. But the true triumph came when Elliot burst into the office, his face flushed with fury. What's going on here? He demanded, his eyes wild. Where's my father? Marina gestured towards the door, a wicked smile playing on her lips. Your father is being taken into custody, Elliot. It seems his little embezzlement scheme has finally caught up with him. Elliot's jaw dropped, his eyes darting between Graham and the detectives. No, this can't be happening. I couldn't resist twisting the knife, relishing in his anguish. Oh, but it is, Elliot. Your father's greed has finally come back to bite him, and you're next. As the detectives hauled Graham away, his muffled protests fading into the distance, I turned to face Elliot. The fear in his eyes was palpable, and I reveled in the knowledge that his world was crumbling around him. You thought you could take everything from me, I said, my voice laced with barely contained triumph. But in the end, you'll be lucky if you're left with the shirts on your backs. Elliot opened his mouth to protest, but the words died on his lips. He knew the game was up, and there was nothing he could do to stop the wheels of justice from turning. As he slunk out of Marina's office, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I couldn't help but savor the moment. Graham and Elliot had underestimated me at every turn, and now they were paying the ultimate price for their hubris. The battle was won, and I had emerged victorious, a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had reclaimed her power and her dignity in the face of overwhelming odds. The days leading up to Graham's trial were a whirlwind of activity. The media had caught wind of the scandal, and the story of the embezzling husband and his deceitful stepson dominated the headlines. As Marina and I arrived at the courthouse, a throng of reporters swarmed us, cameras flashing and microphones thrust in our faces. Miss Westbrook, how do you feel knowing your husband betrayed you in such a despicable way? Do you think Graham and Elliot will receive the maximum sentence? I pushed through the crowd, my jaw set with determination. Marina fought her way to my side, her steely gaze daring the reporters to cross her. No comment, she barked, her voice cutting through the cacophony of questions. We'll have our say in the courtroom. As the courtroom doors swung open, I caught my first glimpse of Graham and Elliot since their arrests. They sat at the defense table, their once arrogant demeanors replaced by a sullen, defeated air. Graham's eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a glimmer of the man I had once loved, the charming, charismatic figure who had swept me off my feet. But that illusion was quickly shattered by the cold reality of his betrayal, and I felt nothing but contempt for the man before me. The trial was a brutal affair, with Marina systematically dismantling Graham's flimsy defense. Each witness, each piece of damning evidence, served to further unravel the web of lies he had so carefully constructed. Mr. Westbrook, you stand accused of embezzling over $2 million from your wife's business, the prosecutor stated, his voice echoing through the courtroom. How do you plead? Graham's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room in a desperate bid for escape. Not guilty, he croaked, the words ringing hollow even to his own ears. As the trial wore on, the weight of the evidence against Graham and Elliot became insurmountable. Bank records, financial statements, even damning testimony from former employees, all of it pointed to their guilt. Elliot, his once youthful arrogance replaced by a pale, haunted expression, took the stand in a last-ditch effort to salvage their crumbling defense. My father and I were just trying to protect our family's interests, he pleaded, his voice trembling. We never meant to cause any harm. Marina seized the opportunity, her eyes glinting with triumph. "Is that so, Mr. Westbrook? Then why did you and your father make numerous attempts to conceal the embezzled funds in offshore accounts?" Elliot's mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. He was caught, trapped in the inescapable web of his own lies. As the jury filed back into the courtroom, a hush fell over the gallery. The foreman stood, his expression grave, and delivered the verdict we had all been waiting for. On the charges of embezzlement, fraud, and money laundering, we find the defendants, Graham Westbrook and Elliot Westbrook, guilty on all counts. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, but I remained steadfast, my gaze fixed on Graham and Elliot. Their faces were a study in anguish, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. As the judge handed down their sentences, lengthy prison terms and hefty fines, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. These men, who had once held such power over me, were reduced to nothing more than common criminals, their greed and deceit laid bare for all to see. As the bailiffs led them away, Graham turned to me one last time, his eyes pleading for forgiveness. But I had none to give. He had made his choices, and now he would have to live with the consequences. In the aftermath of the trial, I found myself standing in the bustling boutique that had been at the center of this sordid saga. Leo approached me, his eyes shining with admiration. "You did it, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You beat them at their own game." I surveyed the shop, taking in the familiar sights and scents that had once brought me such joy. Now they represented something more, a symbol of my resilience, my refusal to be a victim. "No, Leo," I replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "We did it. Together, we reclaimed what was rightfully ours." As I looked toward the future, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But with the strength and determination I had discovered within myself, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, stronger, wiser, and forever unbroken. The months following Graham and Elliot's sentencing were a whirlwind of activity. With the legal battles finally behind me, I was able to turn my attention to rebuilding my life and my business. The first order of business was revitalizing the boutique. I poured every ounce of my energy into breathing new life into the place that had once been the source of so much turmoil. Leo was by my side every step of the way, his unwavering support and loyalty a constant source of strength. Together, we overhauled the decor, updated the merchandise, and implemented new marketing strategies to attract a fresh wave of customers. "This place is going to be better than ever? Sarah?" Leo beamed as we surveyed our handiwork. "Just you wait and see." And he was right. Within a matter of months, the boutique was thriving once again, a testament to the resilience and determination that had carried me through my darkest days. But my journey didn't end there. As I stood amidst the racks of designer clothing and the sparkling displays, I couldn't help but reflect on the countless women who had found themselves in situations similar to mine, trapped in abusive relationships, stripped of their dignity and independence by the very people who were supposed to love and protect them. It was then that the idea took root, a foundation dedicated to empowering and supporting women who had endured the kind of betrayal and deceit that I had faced, a safe haven where they could rebuild their lives, reclaim their strength, and emerge as the warriors they were always meant to be. With a newfound sense of purpose, I immersed myself in the planning and execution of this ambitious endeavor. I poured my heart and soul into creating a comprehensive support system, complete with legal resources, counseling services, and vocational training programs. The day the foundation's doors opened, I stood before a crowd of supporters, my heart swelling with pride and determination. Too many women have had their voices silenced, their spirits crushed by those who sought to control and exploit them, I declared, my voice ringing out with conviction. But no more. This foundation is a sanctuary, a place where you can find the strength to reclaim your power and forge a new path, one defined by resilience, courage, and an unwavering belief in yourselves. The cheers and applause that followed were deafening, a resounding affirmation that my mission had struck a chord. Women from all walks of life, united in their shared experiences, embraced me with tears of gratitude and hope shining in their eyes. In the months and years that followed, the foundation flourished, becoming a beacon of hope and empowerment for countless women who had endured the unimaginable. I poured my heart and soul into mentoring and guiding them, sharing the lessons I had learned through my own ordeal. And as I stood before each graduating class, watching these remarkable women stride across the stage with their heads held high, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of pride and fulfillment. They were the living embodiments of resilience, proof that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit could prevail. As for me, I had embarked on a journey I never could have imagined, one that had taken me from the depths of despair to the heights of personal triumph. The woman I had become was a far cry from the naive, trusting soul who had fallen prey to Graham's machinations. I was a warrior, a survivor, and a beacon of hope for all those who had been wronged. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that my work was far from over. There were countless battles yet to be fought, countless lives to be reclaimed from the shadows of oppression and deceit. But I was ready. Armed with the strength and wisdom born of my experiences, I would continue to forge ahead, lighting the way for others to follow. For in the end, that was the true essence of victory, not just reclaiming what was rightfully mine, but empowering others to do the same. I couldn't believe my ears. As I mingled with relatives at the family reunion, I overheard Rick, my brother-in-law, snickering with his friends. "Once I get that idiot sister-in-law out of the way, the family business will be all ours." A sinking feeling gripped my stomach. Rick had always been arrogant, but I never imagined he harbored such malicious intentions against me. I glanced across the room at my husband, Alan, laughing with his parents, oblivious to the venom spewing from his own brother's mouth. Later that evening, as Alan and I tucked our son, Oliver, into bed, I found myself at a loss for words. How could I shatter the illusion of our perfect family? Oliver's innocent eyes brimmed with love, and I couldn't bring myself to burden his young mind with the harsh reality. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle shifts in Alan's behavior. He grew more distant, often lost in thought, and our once effortless conversations became strained. I couldn't help but wonder if Rick had already planted seeds of doubt about me. One night, Alan broke the news that shook me to my core. "My parents think it's a good idea to invest in Rick's new venture. He's got a solid business plan, and they believe it could be a game changer for the family." I tried to reason with him, expressing my concerns about Rick's motives, but my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Alan's unwavering trust in his family blinded him to the potential consequences of such a risky investment. As the weeks passed, the strain between us intensified. Oliver, ever perceptive, picked up on the tension, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a somber silence. I couldn't bear to see my once happy family crumbling before my eyes. Desperate for answers, I confided in my closest friend, Samantha. Her unwavering support and objective perspective provided the clarity I needed. Together, we began gathering evidence of Rick's past misdeeds, slowly unraveling the web of lies he had carefully constructed. With each damning piece of information we uncovered, my resolve grew stronger. I knew I had to confront Rick, to expose his true nature before he succeeded in tearing my family apart. The stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined, but I was determined to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. In the following weeks, Rick's influence over my in-laws grew stronger. He painted me as a manipulative outsider, hell-bent on undermining the family's legacy. With each conversation, his poisonous words eroded their trust in me. "Marla's been filling your head with nonsense," Rick said during one of his frequent visits. "She's threatened by my success and is trying to sabotage the business deal." Alan's parents nodded solemnly, their expressions a mixture of concern and doubt. It broke my heart to see the once unshakable bond within our family fracturing. At home, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Alan, swayed by Rick's persuasive lies, became increasingly distant and argumentative. "Why can't you just support me on this?" he snapped one evening, after I voiced my reservations about the investment. "It's a fantastic opportunity, and you're letting your personal issues with Rick cloud your judgment." I recoiled at the harshness of his words, feeling helpless in the face of Rick's insidious machinations. Oliver, ever the sensitive child, retreated into himself, sensing the tension that permeated our once happy household. I ached to shield him from the turmoil, but the cracks in our family's foundation were becoming too prominent to ignore. "Dad's been acting weird lately," Oliver confided in me one night as I tucked him into bed. "Is everything okay?" I forced a reassuring smile, stroking his hair gently. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Everything will be all right." Even as the words left my lips, I felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. How could I mend what Rick had so skillfully torn apart? Desperate for a glimmer of hope, I clung to the evidence Samantha and I had gathered, determined to expose Rick's deceitful ways. But with each passing day, the task seemed more daunting, as his lies enveloped my family like a suffocating shroud. One evening, as Alan and I sat in stony silence over dinner, he dropped a bombshell that shattered what little remained of my optimism. "I've decided to go ahead with the investment," he stated flatly, avoiding my gaze. "Rick has assured me it's a solid opportunity, and my parents are fully on board." My heart sank as I realized the extent of Rick's manipulation. He had successfully driven a wedge between Alan and me, exploiting my husband's loyalty to his family for his own nefarious gains. "Alan, please," I pleaded, my voice trembling with emotion. "Can't you see what he's doing? He's using you, using all of us for his own benefit." But my words fell on deaf ears. Alan had made up his mind, and Rick's influence had taken root too deeply. As I lay awake that night, the weight of the situation bearing down on me, I knew I had to act decisively. Rick's treachery could no longer be tolerated. I would expose him, no matter the cost, and reclaim the family he had so callously sought to destroy. With Samantha's unwavering support, I doubled down on my efforts to expose Rick's true nature. We pored over financial records, scoured through emails, and followed every lead, no matter how small. Our diligence paid off when we uncovered evidence of Rick's embezzlement from the family business. Invoices for non-existent expenses, suspicious wire transfers, it was all there, meticulously documented, painting a damning picture of his greed and deceit. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I confronted Alan, determined to make him see the truth. "Rick has been stealing from the company," I stated bluntly, spreading the evidence across the kitchen table. "He's been siphoning funds for his own gain, and now he's trying to drag us all down with this bogus investment." Alan's brow furrowed as he examined the documents, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "This can't be right," he muttered, shaking his head. "Rick would never do something like this." I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face, the desire to trust his brother-in-law warring with the mounting evidence of betrayal. "Open your eyes, Alan," I pleaded, my frustration mounting. "He's been manipulating you, all of us, from the start. This is just the tip of the iceberg." For a moment, I thought I had finally gotten through to him. Alan's gaze met mine, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. But then, as if a switch had been flipped, his expression hardened. "This is just another one of your schemes," he spat, pushing the documents away. "You're so desperate to turn me against my own family that you'd resort to fabricating evidence." His words stung like a physical blow, and I recoiled at the venom in his tone. How could he still be so blind to Rick's machinations? In the days that followed, the tension in our household was palpable. Alan and I barely spoke, our interactions reduced to terse exchanges and icy glares. Oliver, sensing the rift between us, retreated further into himself, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a somber silence that broke my heart. It was during one of these strained silences that I noticed a flicker of doubt cross Alan's face. He had been studying the investment paperwork, his brow furrowed in concentration, when suddenly his eyes narrowed. "Something's not adding up," he murmured, more to himself than to me. Seizing the opportunity, I approached him cautiously, pointing out the discrepancies I had noticed. The inflated projections, the questionable financial backing, the inconsistencies in Rick's pitch. For the first time, I saw the scales begin to tip in my favor. Alan's unwavering faith in his brother-in-law wavered as the evidence mounted, and the cracks in Rick's carefully constructed facade started to show. The arguments that followed were intense, with tempers flaring and voices raised. But through it all, I clung to the hope that Alan was finally seeing the truth, that the person he had trusted implicitly was nothing more than a master manipulator driven by greed and selfishness. As the dust settled, a newfound determination took root within me. Rick's deceit would no longer be tolerated, and I would stop at nothing to expose him, even if it meant risking the fragile bonds that remained within our fractured family. The next family gathering was a tense affair, with undercurrents of mistrust and animosity simmering beneath the surface. I could feel Rick's eyes boring into me, his smug expression a silent challenge. Mustering my courage, I approached him as he mingled with his cronies, the evidence of his misdeeds clutched tightly in my hand. "We need to talk," I stated firmly, my voice carrying across the room. Rick's eyes narrowed, but he quickly plastered on a false smile. "Of course, dear sister-in-law. What seems to be the problem?" I handed him the stack of documents, my hand trembling slightly with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. "These are records of your embezzlement from the family business," I stated, my voice unwavering. "Proof of your lies and deceit." A hush fell over the room as heads turned in our direction, the weight of my accusation hanging heavy in the air. For a moment, Rick's composure faltered, his eyes widening ever so slightly, but he quickly regained his footing, letting out a dismissive chuckle. "Really, Marla? Falsifying documents now?" He shook his head, his gaze sweeping across the gathered family members. "This is just another one of her pathetic attempts to undermine me." I opened my mouth to protest, but Rick cut me off, his voice dripping with contempt. "Don't think I don't know what you're up to," he sneered, taking a step closer. "You're threatened by my success, by the respect I've earned within this family, so you resort to these petty tactics, trying to turn everyone against me." My hands clenched into fists at my sides as Rick's words washed over me, each syllable dripping with venom. I could see the doubt flickering in the eyes of my relatives, their allegiances wavering. Alan stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Marla, is this true? Have you been fabricating evidence?" The weight of his question hung in the air, and I felt the eyes of the entire room upon me. In that moment, I realized the enormity of what was at stake, not just the exposure of Rick's deceit, but the very fabric of our family's trust. Swallowing hard, I met Alan's gaze. "No," I stated firmly. "Every document, every piece of evidence is legitimate. I would never stoop to such levels." Rick scoffed, but I pressed on, my voice gaining strength with each word. "Look at the records, Alan. Look at the wire transfers, the bogus invoices. It's all there, plain as day. Rick has been stealing from the business, from our family, for years." A heavy silence blanketed the room as my words sank in, the weight of the accusation hanging thick in the air. I could see the conflict playing out on Alan's face, the struggle between his loyalty to his brother-in-law and the nagging doubts that had taken root. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "I need proof," he said, his voice low and measured. "Concrete, irrefutable proof of what you're claiming." A surge of determination coursed through me. If proof was what he needed, then proof I would give him. "You'll have it," I promised, my gaze unwavering. "And when you do, you'll see Rick for the liar and manipulator he truly is." As the gathering dispersed, the tension lingering in the air, I knew that the battle lines had been drawn. It was time to take the gloves off and fight for the truth, no matter the cost. The tension in the air was palpable as the family gathered for the emergency meeting. Accusations had been hurled, loyalties tested, and the once solid foundation of our clan had started to crumble. Rick strode into the room, his cocky demeanor a stark contrast to the somber expressions of the others. He shot me a smug glance, as if taunting me to make my next move. Alan cleared his throat, his expression grave. "We're here to address the allegations made against Rick." I could feel every eye on me as I rose from my seat, clutching the recording device in my trembling hand. This was it, the moment of truth. "I have proof," I announced, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. "Proof of Rick's deceit and his intentions to undermine this family for his own gain." Rick scoffed, but I pressed on, hitting the play button on the recorder. His voice, smug and self-assured, filled the room. "Once I get that idiot sister-in-law out of the way, the family business will be all ours." A collective gasp rippled through the room as the damning words echoed off the walls. I watched as the color drained from Rick's face, his mask of arrogance slipping away. That's not what it sounds like," he stammered, his eyes darting around the room in desperation. But the recording played on, each sentence a nail in the coffin of his lies. Been siphoning funds for years. Bogus investment turned the family against her. By the time the recording ended, the room was deathly silent, the weight of the truth hanging heavy in the air. All eyes were fixed on Rick, the once untouchable golden boy now exposed as a fraud and a manipulator. Alan's expression was one of utter disbelief. A mixture of anger and hurt etched onto his features. "How could you?" he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. Rick opened his mouth, no doubt to spew forth more lies, but Alan held up a hand, silencing him. "No more," he said, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "You've done enough damage." In that moment, it was as if the scales had fallen from everyone's eyes. The web of deceit that Rick had so carefully woven was unraveling before our very eyes, and the true depths of his betrayal were laid bare. One by one, family members rose to their feet, their expressions a mixture of disgust and outrage. Even Rick's most ardent supporters couldn't deny the damning evidence. "You're finished," Alan's father spat, his face twisted with anger. "Get out of my sight and never show your face here again." Rick's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, his once smug demeanor reduced to a pathetic display of stammering and denial. As he was unceremoniously escorted from the room, his protests falling on deaf ears, I felt a sense of vindication wash over me. The battle had been long and hard-fought, but in the end, the truth had prevailed. Yet even as I basked in the victory, a pang of sadness tugged at my heart. This was my family, fractured and torn apart by the very person who should have been its strongest ally. The road to healing would be long and arduous, but I knew we would walk it together, stronger and wiser for the trials we had endured. As the dust settled and the adrenaline began to fade, I turned to Alan, our eyes meeting in a silent exchange of understanding and shared relief. The worst was over, but the real work was just beginning. In the aftermath of Rick's stunning downfall, the family was in turmoil. Loyalties were divided, with some still clinging to the belief that he had been wronged, while others rallied around Alan and me, determined to excise the cancer that had festered within our ranks. Rick, however, was not one to go down without a fight. Bitter and vengeful, he launched a campaign of lies and manipulation, attempting to turn the tide of opinion back in his favor. "She's been plotting this from the start," he hissed to anyone who would listen. "Marla's always been jealous of my success, and she saw an opportunity to take me down." His words were like poison, seeping into the minds of the more gullible family members, sowing seeds of doubt and mistrust. But I was no longer the meek, passive woman he had once dismissed. With Alan's unwavering support and the weight of the truth on my side, I pushed back against Rick's slander, countering his lies with irrefutable evidence and heartfelt pleas. "Look at the facts," I implored our relatives, laying out the paper trail of Rick's misdeeds. "He's the one who betrayed us, who put his own greed above the family's well-being." It was an uphill battle, but slowly the tide began to turn. Those who had once been swayed by Rick's silver tongue saw the truth for what it was, and their allegiance shifted back to the family's side. Still, Rick remained defiant, his desperation mounting with each blow to his crumbling facade. It was during one of these tense standoffs that he crossed a line, threatening me with veiled implications of violence. "You'll regret this," he snarled, his face twisted with rage. "No one crosses me and gets away with it." I stood my ground, refusing to be intimidated by his hollow threats. But Alan, ever the protector, would not let such an affront go unanswered. In a blur of motion, he lunged forward, grabbing Rick by the collar and slamming him against the wall. "Don't you ever threaten her again," he growled, his face inches from Rick's. "Or I swear, I'll make you regret the day you were born." The raw fury in Alan's voice sent a chill down my spine, but I couldn't deny the swell of pride and love I felt in that moment. This was the man I had married, strong, loyal, and fiercely protective of those he loved. Rick, for once, was rendered speechless, his bravado crumbling in the face of Alan's righteous anger. It was a pivotal moment, a symbolic shifting of power that left no doubt as to who held the moral high ground. As Alan released his grip, Rick slunk away, his tail firmly between his legs. It was a humiliating defeat, witnessed by those who had once revered him as the golden child. In the days that followed, the family rallied around us, offering their support and condemnation of Rick's actions. The once fractured clan was slowly mending, united in their determination to move forward and leave the toxic legacy of betrayal behind. Yet, Even as the dust settled and a sense of normalcy began to return, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rick's story was not yet over. He was a cornered animal, backed into a corner of his own making, and I knew from experience that such creatures were capable of lashing out with desperate, unpredictable fury. But I was no longer afraid. With Alan by my side and the truth as our shield, we were ready to face whatever Rick threw our way. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. With Rick's deceit exposed and his influence over the family shattered, Alan and I turned our focus to restoring order and trust within the business. It was a daunting task, made all the more challenging by the lingering doubts and divisions that Rick's machinations had sown. We pored over financial records, untangling the web of lies and cover-ups that had been woven over the years. Each discrepancy, each hidden transaction, was like a dagger to the heart, a stark reminder of the depth of Rick's betrayal. As the true extent of the damage became clear, Alan's parents struggled with a deep sense of guilt and shame. How could they have been so blind to the deceit unfolding right under their noses? We trusted him implicitly, Alan's mother confessed, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. He was family, and we never imagined he could be capable of such treachery. It was a sentiment echoed by many, a collective reckoning with the harsh reality that even those closest to us can harbor the darkest of intentions. But through it all, Alan and I remained steadfast in our resolve to rebuild what had been torn asunder. We held meetings, both formal and informal, to address the lingering concerns and doubts that had taken root. With patience and understanding, we listened to the grievances of those who had been swayed by Rick's lies, offering reassurance and a path forward. It was a slow and often frustrating process, but gradually the cracks began to mend. Trust, once shattered, was painstakingly rebuilt, one honest conversation at a time. As the business stabilized, we turned our attention to the legal ramifications of Rick's actions. With the evidence we had gathered, the authorities had no choice but to pursue charges for embezzlement and fraud. The day Rick was taken into custody, a hush fell over the family. There was no joy, no sense of triumph, only a profound sadness that it had come to this. Family bonds, once cherished, had been irreparably severed by greed and deceit. In the aftermath, we sought solace in professional counseling, recognizing the need for outside guidance to navigate the complex emotions and trauma we had endured. It was a humbling experience, but one that ultimately brought us closer together as a family. During one particularly poignant session, Alan's father broke down, his stoic facade crumbling as he confronted the depth of his own culpability. "I should have seen it," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have protected you all from his poisonous influence." In that moment, I felt a profound sense of empathy wash over me. For all the pain and turmoil Rick had caused, he was still a part of this family, and his actions had left wounds that would take time and care to heal. As the weeks turned to months, a sense of normalcy began to return, tempered by a newfound appreciation for the bonds that had been tested and ultimately strengthened. Alan and I found ourselves drawing closer than ever, united in our shared triumph over adversity. It was during this period of healing and growth that we made the decision to renew our vows, a symbolic gesture of our unwavering commitment to one another and to the family we had fought so hard to protect. As I stood before Alan, surrounded by the loved ones who had weathered the storm alongside us, I felt a profound sense of gratitude and hope. The road had been long and arduous, but we had emerged from the crucible of betrayal stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. In the months following our vow renewal, the family business began to thrive once more, the dark cloud of Rick's deceit finally lifting. With honesty and transparency at the helm, we regained the trust of our partners and clients, and the company's reputation was restored. Yet, even as we celebrated our professional successes, there was a deeper, more personal victory that filled me with a profound sense of gratitude. The strength of our family bonds forged anew in the crucible of adversity. Gone were the days of whispered secrets and veiled accusations. In their place was a newfound openness, a commitment to communication and understanding that had been sorely lacking before. I would often catch Alan's parents sharing a knowing glance, their eyes shining with a mix of pride and relief. They had come perilously close to losing everything they held dear, and the lessons learned had left an indelible mark. "We're lucky to have you, Marla," Alan's mother confided one evening as we sipped tea on the patio. "If it weren't for your strength and perseverance, who knows where we'd be right now." Her words, spoken with such sincerity, brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had felt like an outsider, forever seeking acceptance and validation within this family. Now, at last, I felt truly seen and valued for who I was. Oliver, too, seemed to blossom in the newfound atmosphere of trust and stability. Gone was the somber, withdrawn child who had borne witness to the family's turmoil. In his place was a vibrant, confident young man, secure in the knowledge that the bonds that held us together were unbreakable. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he whispered one night as I tucked him into bed, his eyes shining with admiration. "You never gave up, even when things looked really bad." In that moment, I felt a surge of pride and love so intense, it threatened to overwhelm me. Through it all, the lies, the betrayal, the darkest moments when hope seemed lost, Oliver had been my guiding light, my unwavering reminder of what truly mattered. As the days turned to weeks and the weeks to months, our family settled into a new normal, one built on the hard-won lessons of the past. There were still moments of tension, of course, as old wounds took time to fully heal, but we faced them head-on, with open hearts and a willingness to truly listen and understand one another. And through it all, Alan remained my steadfast partner, my rock in the storm. His unwavering love and support had been the bedrock upon which our family's redemption was built, and I found myself falling deeper in love with him with each passing day. It was on a warm summer evening, as we sat side by side on the porch swing, watching Oliver chase fireflies in the twilight, that I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. The battles had been fought, the demons laid to rest, and we had emerged victorious, our bond stronger than ever before. "Can you believe how far we've come?" I murmured, leaning my head against Alan's shoulder. He smiled, his eyes filled with a mix of joy and hard-won wisdom. It wasn't an easy road, but it was worth every step. And in that moment, as the fireflies danced around us like tiny beacons of hope, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. A family united, resilient, and unbreakable. I stared at the text on Trent's phone, my heart pounding as the words burned into my mind. "I love it when you call me that. Can't wait for tomorrow." It was clearly not meant for me. We were supposed to be celebrating my big promotion over dinner, but now everything felt like a lie. Trent must have noticed the look on my face because he quickly tried to grab his phone back. "Mallory, it's not what you think," he stammered, his eyes wide with panic. I felt sick to my stomach, like I'd been punched in the gut. How could he do this to me? To us? After everything we'd been through together? Trent's sister Cassandra looked bewildered, glancing between us. "What's going on?" Before Trent could make up some lame excuse, I stood up abruptly, the fancy restaurant seeming to spin around me. "We're leaving. Now." The drive back to our apartment was agonizingly silent. I kept replaying that damn text over and over, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. When we got inside, I finally exploded. "Who is she?" I demanded, rounding on Trent. "How long has this been going on?" He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "Don't you dare lie to me." Trent's shoulders slumped in defeat. "It's been a few months. I'm so sorry, Mallory." A few months. While we'd been planning our wedding, looking at venues, he'd been sneaking around behind my back. Hot tears of anger and hurt streamed down my face. "I can't believe you," I choked out. "We're through." I stormed into the bedroom, slamming and locking the door behind me. I collapsed onto the bed, sobbing into the pillow until I had no tears left. That's when the anger truly set in, burning through me with white-hot intensity. Trent wanted to play these games? Fine. I would make him regret the day he ever betrayed me. This was not over, not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a burning desire for vengeance. Trent was still asleep on the couch when I emerged from the bedroom, looking pathetic and guilty even in his unconscious state. "Wake up," I snapped, startling him. He jerked awake, eyes widening as he took in my stony expression. "Mallory, I'm so—" "Save it," I cut him off coldly. "I don't want to hear any more of your lies and excuses." Trent swallowed hard, looking like a scolded child. Good. He should feel ashamed. "Who is she?" I demanded again. I want to know everything. He hesitated, but one withering look from me made him crumble. Her name is Jessica. We met at a work conference 6 months ago and... He trailed off miserably. White-hot fury coursed through me at the thought of him carrying on an affair for half a year while I naively planned our future together. Have you been using protection? I asked through gritted teeth, realizing with horror that he could have brought home God knows what. Trent had the decency to look even more ashamed. And no, I haven't. I felt dizzy with disgust and rage. This man I had loved, had trusted more than anyone, had lied to me, used me, disrespected me in the worst way. Something inside me hardened like steel. Get out, I said in a low, dangerous voice. What? Trent looked stricken. You heard me, I said coldly. Get your stuff and get out of my apartment. We're done. He opened his mouth to protest, but I leveled him with a look that could cut glass. Shoulders slumping in defeat, Trent dragged himself to the bedroom to pack a bag. As I watched him slink out the door, I felt a dark sense of satisfaction take root in my heart. This was just the beginning. I would make Trent pay for what he'd done, no matter what it took. And by the time I was finished, his life would be in ruins. Over the next few days, I operated with cold, plus ruthless efficiency. I started by contacting a private investigator and giving them all the details about Trent's infidelity. I wanted every sordid detail of his affair exposed. Then I got to work gathering my own evidence. I dug through our old phone records, bank statements, anything that could reveal more about the depth of Trent's betrayal. With each new discovery, the flames of my fury burned hotter. Thankfully, I had an amazing support system in my friends. When I told them what that bastard had done, they were outraged on my behalf. That piece of garbage! Steph raged when I showed her the hotel receipts. I'll kill him myself. You're too good for that lying snake, Dana seethed, wrapping a supportive arm around me. We'll make him pay, I promise. Their unconditional love and loyalty gave me strength during those dark days. I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for all the women who had ever been cheated on and mistreated by selfish men like Trent. With my friend's help, I formulated a plan of attack. First, we would systematically dismantle Trent's professional life by leaking proof of his indiscretions to his boss and colleagues. Then, we'd take down his social status by revealing his true nature to his smarmy country club pals. Finally, I would deliver the killing blow by crushing his ego and leaving him a pariah. By the time I was done, Trent Holden would be less than a memory. The thought of destroying him brought me a vicious sense of satisfaction. Still, a small part of me felt a twinge of sadness for the man I had once loved. I quickly shoved those feelings aside. Trent had made his bed, and now he could lie in it. My friends noticed my dark mood and tried to lift my spirits. Let's go out tonight, Monica suggested brightly. Get your mind off of things. I managed a small smile, grateful for their efforts to cheer me up. Sure, why not? I could use a distraction. As we headed to our favorite club that night, I caught my reflection in a storefront window. My eyes burned with a hardness I didn't recognize. In that moment, I knew there was no going back. Revenge wasn't just something I wanted. It was something I needed, like air. And I would stop at nothing until Trent's world lay in ashes around him. With the evidence gathered by the private investigator, I was locked and loaded. It was time to start taking Trent down, one piece at a time. First, I anonymously sent a file containing proof of his affair to his boss at the investment firm. Explicit photos, receipts for secret hotel trysts, the works. I made sure to include a polite note about how such indiscretions could open the company up to sexual harassment lawsuits. A few days later, the hammer dropped. Trent was called into an emergency meeting and unceremoniously suspended pending further investigation into his unethical behavior. When I caught wind of the news from Monica, who worked in the same building, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. That was just a taste of what was to come. Next, I turned my sights to dismantling Trent's social status. I may have been raised working class, but I knew how important keeping up appearances was to that smarmy country club crowd he ran with. I created an anonymous email account and sent graphic details of his affair to the board members of his snobby golf club. I even included a few choicely censored photos just to rub salt in the wound. Within a week, Trent had been asked to resign his membership after several decades. Rumor spread like wildfire amongst the cuckolded housewives who ran those upper-crust social circles. But I wasn't done yet. If I wanted to leave Trent well and truly broken, I needed to completely decimate his ego and reputation in our community. That opportunity came at the next meeting of our neighborhood beautification committee, of all places. I haunted those meetings like a ghost, half listening as Trent pompously held court while the other wives and I rolled our eyes. When he launched into another blustery diatribe about the import of maintaining community values, I couldn't stop myself. "Speaking of values," I said loudly, cutting him off, "I have something to share about our esteemed committee chairman." You could have heard a pin drop as all eyes swiveled towards me. Trent paled, realizing where this was going. "Trent here has been having an affair for months," I proclaimed, holding up a manila envelope. "With proof." The explosion of gasps and outcries was a beautiful cacophony to my ears. Trent frantically tried to deflect as I read out the lurid details, but it was too late. His polished veneer of respectability shattered into a million pieces that day, and as I watched him crumble under the weight of his exposed lies, I felt like a goddess of vengeance. The game was oh so deliciously afoot. The next phase of my plan required a more public approach. I decided to strike at the next major charity gala our social circle always attended. It was the perfect stage to completely undermine Trent's crumbling reputation. As I got ready that night, I could feel the excited energy thrumming through me. This was the moment I had been meticulously preparing for. With each swing of the metaphorical sword, I'd been slowly severing Trent's ties to this community. Tonight, I would go for the killing blow. When we arrived at the fancy venue, Trent tried to put on a brave face, but I could see the flicker of fear in his eyes as he scanned the crowd, realizing the damage I'd already done. His usual sycophants were giving him a wide berth, whispering behind raised hands. I swept through the room like royalty, head held high. A server offered me a glass of champagne, which I accepted with a regal nod. The bubbles danced on my tongue as I sipped slowly, savoring the moment. Eventually, it came time for the speeches. A hush fell over the ballroom as the host took the stage to thank everyone for their generous donations. Then, almost as an afterthought, he gestured for me to join him. "We'd also like to acknowledge Mallory Greaves tonight," the host said as I ascended the steps, "for her outstanding leadership and community service over the past year." A smattering of polite applause broke out, but I could feel the energy in the room shift as people realized I was about to speak. Trent looked almost gray as our eyes locked. "Thank you all," I began, my voice ringing with poise and confidence. "It's truly an honor to give back to our community in whatever way I can." I paused, letting that magnanimous statement hang in the air for a beat. Then I went for the jugular. "Unfortunately, not everyone here tonight shares those same values of honor, integrity, and commitment. You could have heard a pin drop. Everyone watched with bated breath, and I could sense Trent's panic rising. Some put on a good show," I continued, holding his stricken gaze. "But behind closed doors, they lie, cheat, and betray the very principles this community was built on." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd as people put two and two together. Trent looked like he wanted to melt through the floor. "Those are not my values," I said firmly, "and they should not be anyone's values if we want to create a society of trust and respect." The applause that followed was thunderous. I gracefully rejoined my table, leaving Trent to stew in humiliation. He tried to storm out, but another attendee blocked his way, loudly condemning his deplorable behavior. As the night raged on, I basked in the triumph of watching my revenge play out so perfectly. Trent deserved every ounce of scorn and embarrassment headed his way, and I was just getting started. After the charity gala, it was like a dam had burst. The evidence of Trent's misdeeds spread through our social circles like wildfire, burning everything in its path. Within days, he was indefinitely suspended from his job at the investment firm, pending further investigation into the mounting allegations of misconduct. His fair-weather friends at the country club didn't even pretend to be subtle. Trent's membership was permanently revoked. Meanwhile, I reveled in my newfound infamy, catching snippets of gossip everywhere I went. "Did you hear what that snake Trent did? Mallory is such a badass for taking him down like that." With each new story of Trent's downfall, I felt more powerful, more vindicated. This was justice being served. Of course, he tried to confront me, to do damage control. Trent showed up at my door one night, eyes blazing with impotent rage. "What have you done?" He snarled as I calmly opened the door. "You've ruined my entire life." I simply raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "I'm just revealing the truth about who you really are. Everything you're going through is nobody's fault but your own." Trent's face contorted with anger, and he took a step forward, fists clenched. An empty threat. We both knew he didn't have the guts to actually hit me. "This isn't over," he spat. "I'll make you pay for this, you vindictive I'd watch your tone if I were you." I cut him off coldly. "Your life is already in tatters thanks to your own despicable actions. Don't make it worse for yourself." With that, I shut the door in his stunned face, not even giving him the satisfaction of a reaction. Let him stew in the mess of his own creation for a while. In the coming weeks, the noose only tightened around Trent's neck. Gripped by morbid curiosity, I started collecting the articles and social media posts that detailed his spectacular fall from grace. There was the scathing editorial from the local paper, dressing him down as a modern-day cad, the deluge of Facebook and Twitter comments from former associates and friends, calling him every insult under the sun. His promising career was in ashes, his reputation forever stained. And to think, this was all just the beginning of what I had planned for him. As the public condemnation crescendoed, Trent started looking gray and haggard, like the life was being drained from him. Good. I wanted him to suffer, to feel even a fraction of the anguish and humiliation he'd put me through. When our mutual friend Monica invited us both to her housewarming party, I knew it was the perfect chance to twist the knife even deeper. I arrived early, greeting the other guests with my usual poise as Trent sulked in the corner, a pariah. This was going to be fun. The housewarming party was in full swing when Trent finally showed his face. As soon as he walked through the door, the atmosphere chilled. People stopped mid-conversation to gawk at the man who had become a public disgrace. Trent's eyes frantically scanned the crowd until they landed on me, holding court by the bar. A snarl twisted his features as he stalked over. "You just can't let this go, can you?" he hissed under his breath. "You've already taken everything from me. What more could you possibly want?" I simply smiled thinly and took a sip of my drink. "The truth will come out sooner or later, Trent. I'm just expediting the process." He opened his mouth to retort, but a sudden lull in the chatter made us both freeze. All eyes had turned towards us with undisguised interest. Seizing the moment, Trent puffed out his chest and raised his voice for all to hear. "Listen, everyone, I know there's been a lot of unfair rumors circulating about me recently, but I can assure you, they're just that, vicious lies perpetuated by a vengeful ex." A disbelieving murmur rippled through the crowd. Trent wasn't deterred, clearly hoping to sway the audience to his side through bluster alone. "Mallory is simply lashing out because she couldn't handle the end of our relationship like a mature adult. This campaign of defamation is nothing more than the unhinged actions of a woman scorned." My hand tightened around my glass as I felt the weight of dozens of accusing stares. How dare he try to play the victim? To rewrite the narrative as if he wasn't a lying, cheating snake? "Is that so?" A cool voice rang out from the back of the room. We all turned to see Monica pushing through the throng of onlookers, a familiar manila envelope clutched in her hand. Oh no, she wouldn't, would she? Trent seemed to realize the same thing, his face draining of color. "Monica, whatever you think you know—" "Save it, Trent," she said flatly, joining me at the center of the makeshift arena. "I have proof right here of everything. Bank statements showing your money trail to hotels and apartments for your little trysts, texts and emails between you and your mistress, even photos and video if anyone needs further convincing." A shocked silence fell over the party as Monica flipped open the envelope, letting a few incriminating photos spill out onto the counter. Up-close shots of Trent in compromising positions with his lover, leaving no doubt as to their indecent activities. "You make me sick." Monica snarled at the shell-shocked Trent, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "How could you do this to Mallory, to all of us who considered you a friend?" She jabbed an accusing finger at the graphic evidence. "This is who you are, Trent. A liar, a cheater, a total embarrassment to anyone who ever trusted you. Mallory is done letting you get away with your lies and deceptions." A smattering of disgusted murmurs echoed through the crowd as they finally saw Trent for the vile snake he truly was. He looked around wildly, searching for any scrap of support or sympathy, but finding only scorn and revulsion. Shoulders slumped in defeat, Trent turned and fled the party without another word, disappearing into the night from which there would be no redemption. I watched him go with a mixture of pity and vicious satisfaction. The once proud man was now a hated pariah, and he had no one to blame but himself. Turning to Monica with a grateful smile, I pulled her into a fierce hug. "Thank you," I murmured, fighting back joyful tears. "For everything." This was the end of Trent Holden, and I had never felt more vindicated or powerful in my life. A few months later, I could finally breathe again. The cloud of anger and obsession that had consumed me after Trent's betrayal had lifted, allowing the sun to peek through once more. As I settled into my swanky new corner office at work, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. My hard work and perseverance had paid off. I'd been promoted to senior marketing director in the wake of the old director's abrupt resignation. Rumor was the scandal surrounding his colleague Trent had been the final straw that broke the company's tolerance for unethical behavior. I smiled wryly, knowing I had played more than a small role in that chain of events. These days, Trent's name was like a dirty word around town. He'd become a virtual pariah, unable to show his face without getting pelted with disgusted looks and whispers. Some nights when I was feeling nostalgic, I'd scroll through the countless think pieces and social media posts dissecting his downfall, my lips curling into a satisfied smirk each time. Entitled creep finally gets what he deserves. Massachusetts man revealed as lying, cheating scumbag. My personal favorite. Mythological furies have nothing on this scorned woman's wrath. The audacity of my revenge plot had become stuff of urban legend in certain circles. I didn't mind. Let the cautionary tale of what happened to Trent Holden serve as a warning for any other unfaithful creeps out there. My friends, of course, remained loyal supporters through it all. We'd crack open a bottle of cheap white wine and raise sarcastic toasts to Trent's increasing misery, to the disgraced dog finally being neutered, to Burns so sick they're going to need medical attention. Those nights filled with raucous laughter and female solidarity made the darkness of those first few weeks feel like a lifetime ago. I had found my voice, my power, and I refused to let any man make me a victim again. Still, there was one last bit of unfinished business with my wretched ex. One night, my phone pinged with a number I didn't recognize. "Mallory, it's me. I know you probably never want to speak to me again, but I need to see you, to apologize properly, face to face, for all the pain I caused you. Please give me a chance to make things right." I stared at the message, letting the words wash over me. Part of me was tempted to meet him, if only to savor the sight of how far he'd fallen. The once cocky, arrogant Trent brought to his knees, begging for forgiveness he'd never deserve. But another part of me, the stronger part, knew there was no point in dredging up the past any longer, that Trent and all his lies and betrayals belonged to another lifetime that I had outgrown. With a decisive swipe, I deleted the message and blocked the number. That chapter of my life was over. Looking around my sleek new apartment with its stunning views, I felt a surge of liberation and excitement for the future. I was a new woman, forging her own story from the ashes of heartbreak and vengeance, and this time it would be one built on truth, on strength, on respect for myself above all others. Bring it on, world. I was more than ready. "So you're taking our home, just like that?" Arlene's voice trembled as she stared at her son, Elliot, and the young woman by his side. Elliot's gaze hardened. "Mom, we've been over this. You promised me the family estate when I turned 30. Well, I'm 30 now, and Iris and I have big plans for the place." Arlene exchanged a worried glance with her husband, Theo. This wasn't the son they'd raised, the one who used to dream of traveling the world, not inheriting property. "Elliot's son," Theo began, his tone calm but firm. "We never made that promise. The estate has been in your mother's family for generations." Iris, Elliot's girlfriend, stepped forward, her eyes narrowed. "With all due respect, Mr. Wilkins, Elliot has told me of this supposed promise, and we intend to follow through on it." Arlene fought back tears, her heart aching at the thought of losing her beloved ancestral home. "This is absurd. We've never discussed anything like that." "Maybe you don't remember," Iris said coolly, "but we have a legal contract that states otherwise." Elliot nodded, his expression hard. "I'm sorry, Mom, Dad, but this is happening, whether you like it or not." As Arlene watched her son turn and walk away, arm in arm with Iris, she felt a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. This was only the beginning of a battle she never saw coming, a battle to save not just her home, but her family. Over the next few days, the tension in the Wilkins household was palpable. Arlene spent hours poring over old documents, desperate to find any shred of evidence to support Elliot's claim. But there was nothing. "How could he do this to us?" she asked Theo one night, her voice hoarse from crying. Theo pulled her close, his brow furrowed with worry. "I don't know, Arlene, but we can't let them take what's rightfully yours." Arlene nodded, her resolve hardening. She would fight for her home, no matter what it took. A week later, Elliot and Iris arrived unannounced, their expressions smug. "We've given you plenty of time to get your affairs in order," Iris said, her tone icy. "Now we'll be taking over the estate." Arlene felt her heart rate quicken as she studied the young woman before her. There was something calculating, almost predatory in Iris's gaze. "Like hell you will," Arlene shot back, surprising even herself with her vehemence. Elliot's eyes widened. "Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be." But Arlene had made up her mind. She wasn't about to let this conniving woman waltz in and steal her family's legacy. "Listen closely, Iris," she said, her voice low and steady. "This is my home, and if you think you can just take it from me, you've got another thing coming." As Iris's eyes narrowed dangerously, Arlene knew she was in for the fight of her life. But she was ready to protect her family, her history, and everything she held dear. In the days that followed, I quickly discovered that Iris wasn't just a conniving girlfriend, she was a force to be reckoned with, and she had powerful allies on her side. "You might want to rethink this little crusade of yours," she said one afternoon, a smug smile playing on her lips. "My uncle happens to be one of the biggest real estate developers in the city." I felt a chill run down my spine as the realization hit me. If Iris's uncle threw his weight behind her, we could lose more than just the family estate. Theo must have sensed my unease, because he reached for my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. "We're not backing down," he said, his voice unwavering. "This is our home, and we'll fight for it." Iris let out a derisive laugh. "Suit yourselves, but don't say I didn't warn you." As she turned and sauntered out, I couldn't help but feel like we were in over our heads. That night, Theo and I sat in the living room, the weight of our predicament hanging heavy in the air. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Theo sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "We can't let them intimidate us, Arlene. We have to stand our ground." I nodded, but deep down, I was terrified. Iris wasn't just some spoiled brat, she was a calculating, ruthless woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Over the next few weeks, the tension only escalated. Elliot, once our sweet, kind-hearted son, had become a stranger under Iris's influence. He would show up at the estate unannounced, making demands and veiled threats. "You're only making this harder on yourselves," he said one day, his eyes cold and distant. I wanted to reach out and shake him, to make him see the truth, that Iris was using him, manipulating him for her own gain. But Theo held me back, his grip firm but gentle. "Don't engage," he murmured. "That's what she wants." So I bit my tongue and watched as my son, my flesh and blood, turned his back on us once again. It was during one of these tense encounters that I had an idea, a desperate, last-ditch effort to make Iris see reason. "If you're so confident in your ability to manage this estate," I said, my voice laced with barely contained anger, "then prove it." Iris raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. "What did you have in mind?" "We'll give you 3 months," I continued. 3 months to run the estate as you see fit. If you can turn a profit and keep everything running smoothly, we'll consider your claim." Iris's eyes narrowed, but I could see the glimmer of challenge in her gaze. "And if I fail?" "Then you and Elliot walk away," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "For good." For a moment, the room was silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Iris's lips curled into a smile that sent shivers down my spine. "You've got a deal." As she shook my hand, her grip firm and unyielding, I knew I had just set into motion a dangerous game, one where the stakes were higher than ever before. But I was determined to win, no matter the cost. With Iris's confidence bordering on arrogance, she wasted no time in taking control of the estate. Within days, she had fired half the staff, claiming they were incompetent and costly. "This place is a mess," she sneered as she strutted through the halls, her high heels clicking against the hardwood floors. "No wonder it's been hemorrhaging money." Theo tried to reason with her, but she would have none of it. "This is my show now, old man," she said, her lips curled into a condescending smile. "And things are going to change around here." I could only watch helplessly as Iris systematically dismantled everything we had built over the years. She brought in her own people, most of whom seemed more interested in lining their pockets than actually running the estate. "She's going to run this place into the ground," Theo muttered one night as we lay in bed, the weight of our worries keeping us both awake. I knew he was right, but I also knew that we had to give Iris a chance, as much as it pained me. If she failed, it would be her own undoing. But as the weeks ticked by, it became increasingly clear that Iris was no mere incompetent novice. She was a cunning, manipulative woman with a knack for skirting the rules and cutting corners. "We need to be more aggressive with our pricing," she announced at a staff meeting one day. "If people can't afford to stay here, that's their problem." I watched in horror as she implemented a series of changes that all but guaranteed the estate would bleed money. Higher rates, fewer amenities, and a general disregard for customer satisfaction. "She's sabotaging herself," Theo whispered to me after the meeting. "She has to be." But I wasn't so sure. There was a calculating gleam in Iris's eye that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. And then, the unthinkable happened. One of our most loyal, long-standing employees, a groundskeeper who had been with us for over a decade, was unceremoniously fired. "You're letting him go?" I asked incredulously, my heart breaking for the kind, hard-working man. Iris shrugged, her expression indifferent. "He's past his prime. We need fresh blood around here." As I watched the man gather his belongings, tears streaming down his weathered face, I felt a white-hot rage simmering beneath the surface. This had gone too far. That night, after Iris had retired to her quarters, I cornered Elliot in the hallway. "How can you let her do this?" I demanded, my voice trembling with emotion. "She's destroying everything we've built, everything your grandfather left us." For a moment, Elliot's gaze flickered with something akin to doubt, but then, just as quickly, it hardened once again. "Iris knows what she's doing, Mom," he said, his tone dismissive. "You need to trust her." As he brushed past me, I knew in that moment that I had lost him, at least for now. But I also knew that I couldn't give up. If Iris wanted a war, she would get one. As the weeks wore on, it became increasingly clear that Iris's true colors were starting to show. The once confident, self-assured woman was now a frazzled, short-tempered tyrant, barking orders at anyone who crossed her path. "This place is a nightmare," she hissed at Elliot one morning, her voice dripping with venom. "I don't know how you ever thought we could make a profit here." Elliot, to his credit, seemed taken aback by her outburst. "Iris, calm down. We just need to stay the course." But Iris was having none of it. With a dismissive wave of her hand, she stalked off, leaving Elliot standing there, a bewildered expression on his face. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction at the sight. Perhaps now, my son would finally see the truth about his so-called girlfriend. But my satisfaction was short-lived. Over the next few days, Iris's erratic behavior only escalated. She was constantly firing staff, changing policies on a whim, and making rash decisions that only served to drive the estate further into the red. "This is madness," Theo said one night, his brow furrowed with worry. "She's going to bankrupt us at this rate." I nodded grimly, knowing that he was right. But there was a part of me that couldn't help but wonder if Iris's actions were all part of some larger scheme. My suspicions were confirmed a few days later when one of the staff members, a young woman named Sarah, approached me with a disturbing revelation. "Mrs. Wilkins," she said, her voice hushed and her eyes darting around nervously, "I think you should take a look at these." In her trembling hands, she held a stack of documents, contracts, invoices, and receipts, all bearing Iris's signature. As I flipped through them, my heart sank. These weren't just bad business decisions. They were outright fraudulent activities, designed to siphon money from the estate and into Iris's own pockets. "How did you get these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah swallowed hard. "I overheard Iris talking on the phone. She was boasting about how she was going to bleed this place dry and take everything for herself." I felt a cold fury wash over me. So that was Iris's game. To deliberately run the estate into the ground, all while lining her own pockets with our money. "That snake," I hissed, my fingers tightening around the damning evidence in my hands. Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "I knew something wasn't right. That's why I started keeping copies of everything." In that moment, I felt a surge of gratitude for this young woman's bravery and foresight. She had just handed me the ammunition I needed to take Iris down once and for all. As I clutched the documents to my chest, I knew that the time for playing nice was over. Iris had crossed a line, and now she would have to face the consequences. I was going to make sure of it. With the damning evidence in hand, I knew I had to act quickly. Iris was a snake in the grass, and if I didn't expose her soon, she would slither away with everything we had. The first order of business was to confront Elliot. As much as it pained me to see him so blinded by Iris's manipulation, I knew he deserved to know the truth. "Son, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm but tinged with concern. Elliot looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowed. "What is it, Mom?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what was to come. "It's about Iris. I have proof that she's been embezzling funds from the estate." For a moment, Elliot's expression was one of disbelief. But as I laid out the evidence, the fraudulent contracts, the inflated invoices, the paper trail of deceit, his face fell. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "It can't be true." But the facts were undeniable, and deep down I knew he could see it too. "I'm sorry, Elliot," I said, reaching out to touch his arm, "but she's been playing you this whole time." Tears welled in my son's eyes, and for a moment I thought he might break down. But then something shifted in his gaze, a flicker of determination that I hadn't seen in far too long. "That lying bitch," he growled, his fists clenching at his sides. It was in that moment that I knew we had a chance to take Iris down and reclaim what was rightfully ours. But just as we were plotting our next move, a familiar figure stormed into the room, his eyes blazing with fury. It was the groundskeeper Iris had so callously fired, the one who had dedicated years of his life to maintaining our beloved estate. "You need to see this," he said, thrusting a manila envelope into my hands. Inside were pictures, damning photographs of Iris meeting with shady-looking individuals, exchanging what appeared to be stacks of cash. "I took these a few days ago," the groundskeeper explained, his voice trembling with rage. "That woman is up to no good, and I aim to prove it." I felt a surge of gratitude towards this loyal man who had risked everything to expose Iris's misdeeds. "Thank you," I said, squeezing his hand. "This is exactly what we need." As the groundskeeper nodded and turned to leave, I knew that the tipping point had been reached. Iris's web of lies and deceit was unraveling, and soon she would have nowhere left to hide. Turning to Elliot, I saw a fire burning in his eyes, a determination to right the wrongs that had been committed against our family. "It's time," he said, his voice steely with resolve. "Time to take back what's ours." And in that moment, I knew that we were finally on the path to victory. A victory that had been hard-fought and long overdue. Iris's reign of terror was about to come crashing down around her, and we would be there to watch it all unfold. With the evidence mounting against Iris, I knew it was time to confront her once and for all. I gathered Theo, Elliot, and the loyal staff members who had risked everything to expose her misdeeds. "Are you sure about this, Arlene?" Theo asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I nodded, my resolve unwavering. "It's the only way. We have to bring her down before she destroys us all." Elliot placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "I'm with you, Mom. Let's end this once and for all." Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and marched towards Iris's office, the others trailing close behind. As we approached the door, I could hear her voice, shrill and demanding, as she barked orders at some unseen lackey. Without hesitation, I threw open the door, the damning evidence clutched tightly in my hands. "Enough, Iris," I said, my voice ringing with authority. "The game is over." Iris's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of our little posse. "What is the meaning of this?" she spat, her lip curling in disdain. I held up the stack of documents, letting them speak for themselves. "We know what you've been up to, Iris. The embezzlement, the fraudulent deals, it all stops now." For a moment, Iris's expression faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. But then, just as quickly, she regained her composure, her mask of arrogance slipping back into place. "You have no proof," she sneered, her eyes darting from one of us to the next. "Just a bunch of baseless accusations." It was then that Elliot stepped forward, his face a mask of steely determination. "That's where you're wrong, Iris," he said, his voice laced with barely contained fury. "We have all the proof we need." He gestured to the groundskeeper, who stepped forward with the envelope of damning photographs. "Care to explain these?" Iris's eyes widened as she took in the incriminating images, her carefully constructed facade crumbling before our very eyes. "You bitch," she hissed, her mask of civility finally shattering. "You think you can take me down? You have no idea who you're dealing with." But even as the words left her lips, I could see the fear flickering in her eyes. She knew she was cornered, her web of lies finally catching up to her. "It's over, Iris," I said, my voice heavy with finality. "You've lost." Iris opened her mouth to respond, but the words never came. Instead, she simply stared at us, her eyes burning with a potent mix of hatred and defeat. It was in that moment that I knew we had won. Not just the battle for our home, but the war against Iris's deceit and betrayal. As we filed out of her office, leaving her to stew in her own failure, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally coming to an end. But even as we celebrated our victory, I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. Iris was a formidable foe, and I had no doubt that she would try to retaliate in any way she could. Yet as I looked at Elliot, his face alight with determination, and Theo, his eyes shining with pride, I knew that we were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. We were a family, united and unbreakable, and no matter what Iris threw our way, we would face it together, just as we had faced everything else. Because in the end, that's what mattered most. Family, loyalty, and the unshakable bond that ties us all together. And with that, I knew that we had already won the most important battle of all. In the aftermath of our confrontation with Iris, a tense silence settled over the estate. We all knew that this was far from over, that the snake we had cornered would likely strike back with everything she had. Sure enough, it wasn't long before Iris resurfaced, her eyes blazing with fury and her lips curled into a snarl of defiance. "You think you've won?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You've only made things worse for yourselves." Elliot, to his credit, stood firm, his expression resolute. "It's over, Iris. We have all the evidence we need to take you down." But Iris simply laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Elliot, you sweet, naive fool. Do you really think it's that simple?" Before any of us could react, she whirled on me, her gaze piercing and accusatory. "You've made a grave mistake, Arlene, and I'm going to make sure you pay dearly for it." I felt a flicker of fear in the pit of my stomach, but I refused to let it show. "Are those threats, Iris? Because if they are, you've just sealed your own fate." Iris's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought she might lunge at me. But then, just as quickly, her expression shifted, a sickly, sweet smile spreading across her face. "No threats, darling," she purred, her tone dripping with mock sincerity. "Just a friendly warning." With that, she turned on her heel and swept out of the room, leaving a trail of tension and unease in her wake. "She's unhinged," Theo muttered, his brow furrowed with worry. "Who knows what she's capable of?" I nodded grimly, knowing that he was right. Iris was a desperate, cornered animal, and that made her all the more dangerous. But even as the threat of her retaliation loomed over us, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that the truth had finally come to light. Elliot, my sweet, misguided son, had finally seen Iris for the manipulative, deceitful person she truly was. As the days passed, I could see the weight of his guilt settling heavily upon his shoulders. He would often seek me out, his eyes filled with remorse and regret. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said one evening, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have listened to you from the start." I pulled him into a tight embrace, my heart aching for the pain he was feeling. "It's all right, Elliot. What matters now is that we've stopped her. But even as the words left my lips, I knew that the road ahead would be far from easy. Iris was a formidable adversary, and I had no doubt that she would stop at nothing to exact her revenge. Sure enough, it wasn't long before the first salvo was fired. A letter arrived from Iris's lawyers threatening legal action and demanding that we drop all charges against her. "They can't be serious," Elliot scoffed, crumpling the letter in his fist. "We have all the evidence we need to bury her." But Theo's expression was grave, his eyes clouded with worry. "Arlene, we can't take this lightly. Iris has connections, and she'll stop at nothing to protect herself." I knew he was right. Iris was a snake, and like any snake, she would strike when we least expected it. But as I looked around at my family, their faces etched with determination and resolve, I knew that we were ready for whatever she threw our way. Because this time, we were fighting not just for our home, but for our very souls. And no matter how hard Iris tried, she would never be able to take that away from us. With a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and met Theo's gaze, my own eyes burning with a fire that had been stoked by years of betrayal and lies. "Let her try," I said, my voice low and steady. "We're not backing down. Not now. Not ever." Because in the end, that's what this was all about. Standing our ground, protecting what was rightfully ours, and ensuring that justice was served. And as we braced ourselves for the battle ahead, I knew that no matter what Iris had in store for us, we would face it head-on, united and unbreakable. For that was the true strength of family, a bond that could never be severed, no matter how hard the enemy tried. In the weeks that followed, Iris's threats of legal action proved to be little more than empty posturing. With the mountain of evidence we had against her, even her high-priced lawyers knew they were fighting a losing battle. "It's over, Iris," Elliot said, his voice ringing with finality as we gathered in the estate's grand foyer. "The authorities have everything they need to put you away for a long time." Iris's eyes narrowed, her lips pressed into a thin, defiant line. "This isn't the end, Elliot. Mark my words, I'll make you all pay for this." But even as the words left her mouth, I could see the fear flickering behind her eyes. She knew she had been beaten, her carefully constructed facade of deceit crumbling around her. As the authorities led her away in handcuffs, her head held high, but her shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The nightmare was finally over, or so I thought. In the days that followed, Elliot grew increasingly withdrawn, his once vibrant spirit dulled by the weight of his own guilt and shame. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. "I let that woman blind me to everything that was important." I pulled him into a tight embrace, my heart aching for the pain he was feeling. "It's all right, Elliot. What matters now is that we've come through this stronger than ever." But even as the words left my lips, I could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. He was a man haunted by his own mistakes, struggling to find his way back to the path he had so carelessly strayed from. It was in those moments that I realized the true cost of Iris's betrayal. She had nearly torn our family apart, her poisonous influence seeping into the very fabric of our lives and leaving a trail of pain and mistrust in its wake. But even as the wounds she had inflicted still stung, I knew that we had a choice: to let her actions define us, or to rise above them and reclaim the bond that had sustained us for so long. And so we chose the latter. With each passing day, we worked to rebuild the trust that had been shattered, to mend the rifts that Iris had so callously created. It wasn't easy, but slowly, surely, we began to heal. Elliot, bless his heart, was the driving force behind our reconciliation. He threw himself into the task of restoring the estate to its former glory, working tirelessly to undo the damage that Iris had wrought. "This is my penance," he would say, his brow glistening with sweat as he toiled away in the gardens or tended to the repairs that had been so long neglected. And as I watched him pour his heart and soul into the task, I couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. This was the son I had raised, the one whose loyalty and determination had been momentarily clouded, but never truly lost. As the months passed, the estate slowly but surely began to regain its former luster, a testament to the resilience of our family and the unbreakable bond that had seen us through even the darkest of times. And on the day that we finally moved back into our ancestral home, a weight seemed to lift from our shoulders, a weight that had been born of Iris's deceit, and the turmoil she had brought into our lives. "We made it," Theo said, his eyes shining with pride as he surveyed the restored grandeur of the estate. I nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. We did, and we'll never let anyone tear us apart again. As we gathered together, a family once more united and whole, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey we had taken. A journey that had tested us in ways we never could have imagined, but one that had ultimately strengthened the bonds that truly mattered. And as the sun set over our beloved home, casting a warm golden glow over the grounds, I knew that we had emerged from the darkness, stronger, wiser, and more resolute than ever before. For in the end, that was the true lesson we had learned. That family was not just a bond of blood, but a sacred trust that could weather even the fiercest of storms. And with that knowledge firmly in our hearts, we stepped forward into a future that was brighter and more promising than ever before. Even after 10 years, Loretta's voice still had the power to make the room feel colder. "Mara, darling, is that you?" The familiar, crisp tone sliced through the chatter of the salon, sending a shiver down my spine. I turned to face my former mother-in-law, her perfectly coiffed hair and tailored suit, a jarring contrast to the casual atmosphere. "Loretta," I managed, my throat tightening. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes narrowed, scanning me with disdain. "Is that any way to greet family? Especially after all this time." She pursed her lips, ignoring the curious stares from the other stylists and clients. I fought the urge to recoil, steadying my voice. "We both know you never considered me family." Loretta waved a dismissive hand. "Water under the bridge, my dear. I'm actually here because I need your help." Her gaze flickered with something I couldn't quite place. "It's about Eli." My ex-husband's name hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly a decade, not since Loretta orchestrated our bitter separation shortly after Avery's birth, cutting me off from my own daughter. "You have some nerve," I said through gritted teeth. "After everything you put me through, everything you cost me." "Please, Mara." Loretta's tone softened, but her eyes remained steely. "This isn't about the past, it's about Avery." My heart clenched at the mention of my little girl, now a young woman I barely knew thanks to Loretta's machinations. I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. Loretta leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Eli's in trouble, deeper than I can handle alone, and my health." She trailed off, a rare vulnerability flickering across her features. I studied her for a long moment, 1,000 memories and recriminations swirling in my mind. Part of me wanted to turn away, to sever the last thread tying me to that toxic family. But the thought of Avery, caught in the crossfire of whatever drama Loretta had woven, tugged at my heart. Finally, I exhaled a long breath. "All right, Loretta, I'll hear you out, but I'm not making any promises." A ghost of a smile played across her lips, and for a fleeting instant I saw the same calculating glint that had haunted me for years. "Of course, dear. That's all I ask." As Loretta slid into the chair across from me at the cafe, I steeled myself for whatever bombshell she was about to drop. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against the table, a nervous tick I recognized from our past encounters. "I don't have much time to mince words, Mara," she began, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial tone. "Eli's in deep trouble, and it's all my fault." I tensed at the mention of my ex-husband's name, memories of our toxic marriage flooding back. "What did you do this time, Loretta?" She bristled at my accusatory tone. "Don't take that tone with me, young lady. I'm trying to make things right." Her brow furrowed, and for a moment she looked every bit her age. "Eli's gambling addiction has spiraled out of control. He's racked up debts with some unsavory characters, and they're threatening to come after Avery if he doesn't pay up." A chill ran down my spine. My own daughter, caught up in the mess Loretta had created. Why should I believe a word you say? I shot back, my voice sharpened by years of pent-up anger. "You've done nothing but manipulate and lie since the day we met." Loretta recoiled as if I'd slapped her. "You think I wanted any of this?" she hissed. "I tried to mold him into the man this family needed, but he was weak, just like his father. This is the price of my failure as a mother." I scoffed, shaking my head in disbelief. "Failure as a mother? You drove a wedge between us from the start, Loretta. You never gave our marriage a chance because you couldn't stand the thought of not being in control." Her eyes flashed with fury, but she remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. In that moment, I saw the truth laid bare. Her selfish need for power had destroyed not just my life, but her own son's as well. You threw me out when I needed family the most, I continued, my voice thick with emotion. What could you possibly want now? Loretta's gaze dropped, and for a long moment she said nothing. Finally, she met my eyes, her own brimming with unshed tears. I want to make it right, Mara, for Avery's sake, if nothing else. I studied her closely, searching for any hint of deception, but behind the poise and arrogance, I saw only a broken woman, grasping at one last chance to salvage something from the wreckage she'd created. What did you have in mind? I asked cautiously, silently bracing myself for whatever new manipulation she had up her sleeve. Loretta took a deep breath, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the tabletop. I want you to come live with us, Mara. Be the stabilizing force Eli and Avery so desperately need. I nearly choked on my coffee. You can't be serious, I sputtered. After everything you've done, you expect me to just waltz back into that toxic environment? Do you think this is easy for me? Loretta snapped, her composure slipping. Swallowing my pride and asking for your help? But Eli's spiraling, and I'm not getting any younger. If he keeps going down this path, my entire legacy could be squandered. I shook my head in disbelief. Of course, it all came back to her precious legacy and control over the family fortune. Your greed is what got us into this mess in the first place, Loretta. Why should I trust you now? She leaned forward, her eyes boring into mine with an intensity that gave me pause. Because for once, my interests align with yours. We both want what's best for Avery. My breath caught in my throat at the mention of my daughter's name. It had been nearly a decade since I'd last seen her, just a young girl ripped from my arms by Loretta's manipulations. The thought of being reunited with her, of protecting her from the chaos Eli had created, tugged at my heart. You'll have a chance to make things right, Loretta pressed on, sensing my hesitation. To be the mother you always wanted to be, isn't that worth taking a chance? I searched her face for any hint of deception, but her expression remained earnest. Or was I just seeing what I wanted to see, falling for her lies once again? All right, I said slowly, my mouth suddenly dry. I'll do it, but not for you, Loretta, for Avery. A satisfied smile crept across her lips. Of course, dear, whatever you say. As she rose to leave, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was walking into yet another trap, one expertly laid by the master manipulator herself. But the prospect of reconnecting with my daughter, of offering her the stability and love I'd been denied, outweighed my misgivings. He's ruined, Mara, Loretta said, her voice low and urgent. If not for him, do it for Avery. And with those parting words, she was gone, leaving me to wrestle with the weight of my decision and the sinking suspicion that I was merely a pawn in her latest game. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. The lines on my face seemed deeper, etched by years of heartache and loneliness. Was I really considering walking back into the lion's den, putting myself at Loretta's mercy once again? A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Come in, I called out, turning to see Grace letting herself in, a concerned look on her face. You've been awfully quiet since our lunch the other day, she said, taking a seat on the couch. What's going on in that head of yours? I sighed, sinking down next to her. Grace had been my rock through the darkest days, holding me together when Loretta's machinations threatened to tear me apart. If anyone could help me make sense of this tangled mess, it was her. Loretta wants me to move back in, I confessed, the words feeling surreal as they left my lips, to help with Eli and Avery. Grace's eyes widened in disbelief. After everything she put you through? Mara, you can't seriously be considering this. I have to at least try, Grace, I insisted, my voice thick with emotion. Avery is caught in the middle of their dysfunction, and I owe it to her to be there. Grace reached out, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. But at what cost to yourself? That woman nearly destroyed you once. Who's to say she won't try again? Her words struck a chord, dredging up memories I'd tried so hard to bury. The constant belittling and manipulation, the emotional abuse that had left me a hollow shell of my former self, all orchestrated by Loretta's cruel hand. You're right, I whispered, blinking back tears. She's a viper, and I'd be a fool to trust her again. Grace pulled me into a comforting embrace, and for a moment I allowed myself to be enveloped in her warmth and support. "Maybe it's not about giving them a second chance," she said gently, pulling back to meet my gaze, "but about giving yourself one." Her words hung in the air, their weight slowly sinking in. For years, I'd been defined by my past, by the pain and rejection Loretta had inflicted upon me. But what if this was an opportunity to reshape my narrative, to confront those demons head-on and reclaim the life I deserved? "You're right," I said, feeling a newfound resolve stirring within me. "It's time I stopped running from my past and faced it head-on." Grace beamed, giving my shoulder an affectionate squeeze. "That's my girl. Just promise me you'll be careful, okay? I don't want to see you get hurt again." I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Don't worry, I've got this. It's time to show Loretta that she doesn't hold all the cards anymore." As I spoke the words, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, replaced by a steely determination. No more hiding, no more running. This time I would face my demons on my own terms and emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The imposing wrought iron gates of the Blackwood estate loomed before me, their intricate patterns casting eerie shadows in the fading light. Taking a deep breath, I steeled my resolve and pressed the call button on the intercom. "State your business," a gruff voice barked through the speaker. "It's Mara," I replied, my mouth suddenly dry. "Loretta is expecting me." There was a momentary pause, then a harsh buzz as the gate swung open with a groan of protest. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, willing my hands to stop shaking as I guided my car up the winding driveway. The sprawling mansion looked just as I remembered, cold, imposing, every inch a monument to Loretta's wealth and status. I cut the engine, the silence pressing in around me like a vice. "You've got this," I muttered under my breath, grabbing my bag from the passenger seat. Time to face the demons. The heavy oak door swung open before I could knock. And there stood Loretta, perfectly coiffed as ever, regarding me with a critical eye. "You're late," she said by way of greeting, her tone clipped. "I expected more punctuality from you, Mara." I bristled at her condescending tone, but bit back the retort on the tip of my tongue. "My apologies. Traffic was heavier than I anticipated." Loretta pursed her lips, clearly unimpressed with my excuse. "Well, come in then. No sense standing out in the cold." I followed her into the cavernous foyer, my eyes adjusting to the dim lighting and hushed atmosphere. Not a single thing had changed. The same antique furniture, the same austere decor, the same oppressive air of joyless affluence. "This house hasn't changed," I remarked, unable to contain the edge of bitterness in my voice. "Cold and full of secrets, just like its owner." Loretta whirled on me, her eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "Mind your tongue, Mara," she hissed. "You're here on my terms, remember?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the sound of footsteps on the marble staircase drew our attention. My breath caught in my throat as a young woman descended, her features achingly familiar. "Avery," I whispered, drinking in the sight of my daughter, now a beautiful young woman of 18. She paused on the landing, her eyes narrowing as she studied me with guarded curiosity. "So you're the one Gran's been going on about," she said, her tone laced with skepticism. "The big solution to all our problems." Before I could reply, another figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Eli. My ex-husband looked haggard and worn, his eyes rimmed with dark circles and his clothes rumpled. He regarded me with a mixture of surprise and wariness, as though I were a ghost from another life. "Well, well," he muttered, descending the stairs to stand beside Avery. "If it isn't the prodigal wife returning." Acid rose in my throat as I struggled to maintain my composure in the face of their blatant hostility. Squaring my shoulders, I met Eli's gaze head-on. "I'm not here for you," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "I'm here for Avery, to try and undo the damage you've clearly inflicted on her life." Eli recoiled as if I'd struck him, while Avery's eyes widened fractionally. Loretta cleared her throat, stepping between us with a tight smile plastered across her face. Now, let's not get ahead of ourselves," she chided, resting a hand on Avery's shoulder in a gesture that seemed almost possessive. "We're all family here, are we not?" Her words rang hollow, the false veneer of civility doing little to mask the undercurrent of tension crackling through the air. As I looked from Eli's broken form to Avery's guarded expression, I knew in that moment that Loretta had bulk. truly met her match. This was going to be a battle, and I had every intention of emerging victorious, no matter what it took. The days that followed were a tense dance of forced civility and thinly veiled hostility. Eli avoided me like the plague, while Avery regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and wariness, clearly unsure what to make of this sudden reappearance in her life. Loretta, ever the consummate hostess, maintained a facade of familial harmony, but I could see the cracks in her composure growing wider with each passing day. Something was brewing beneath the surface, and I knew better than to let my guard down. It all came to a head one evening as I was making my way to the kitchen for a late-night cup of tea. As I passed Loretta's study, the soft glow of a lamp caught my eye, along with the unmistakable sounds of shuffling papers. Curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself drawn to the slightly ajar door. Peering through the gap, I saw Loretta hunched over her desk, a frown creasing her brow as she pored over what appeared to be legal documents. "This has to be airtight," she muttered to herself, scribbling furiously. No room for error. I leaned closer, straining to make out the words on the pages before her. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the words "Last Will and Testament" emblazoned across the top. Of course. It all made sense now. Loretta's sudden invitation, her insistence on having me under her roof once more. This was never about reconciliation or righting past wrongs. It was about securing her wealth, using me as a pawn to control Avery's future. White-hot anger surged through me as the pieces fell into place. Loretta was up to her old tricks, manipulating everyone around her like marionettes on a string. Well, not this time. I'd been fooled once, but never again. Before I could stop myself, I pushed open the door and strode into the study, my hands balled into fists at my sides. Loretta's head snapped up, her eyes widening in surprise and alarm. "Mara! What are you doing in here?" "Cut the act, Loretta," I spat, snatching the papers from her desk and waving them in her face. "I know what game you're playing." Her expression hardened, the mask of false civility slipping away to reveal the cold, calculating woman I knew so well. "So you figured it out, have you?" she sneered. "Took you long enough." "It was never about redemption," I accused, my voice trembling with fury. "It was always about control, using me to keep a leash on Avery, just like you tried to do with me all those years ago." Loretta rose from her chair, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Oh, Mara, always so naive, even after all this time." She tutted softly, shaking her head. "Did you really think I'd let some washed-up hairstylist waltz back into my family and undo everything I've built? This is about preserving my legacy, and if you can't see that, then you're even more foolish than I thought." I recoiled as if she'd struck me, her words cutting deeper than any physical blow. In that moment, I saw the true depths of her depravity, the lengths she would go to maintain her iron grip on our lives. "You're a monster, Loretta," I whispered, hot tears stinging my eyes, "and I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth about you." Her laughter was like nails on a chalkboard, grating and mocking. "Go ahead and try, dear. Who do you think they'll believe, me or the bitter ex-wife with a grudge?" As she spoke those words, I knew she was right. Loretta had spent years cultivating her image, weaving an intricate web of lies and deceit. But this time I had proof of her true nature, tangible evidence of her manipulation. Squaring my shoulders, I met her gaze with newfound resolve. "We'll see about that, Loretta. This isn't over, not by a long shot." With the documents clutched tightly in my hand, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the study, my mind already whirring with plans for how to expose Loretta's true colors to the world. The battle lines had been drawn, and this time I had no intention of losing. The tension was palpable as Loretta's extended family gathered for her annual summer garden party. Elegantly dressed guests milled about the perfectly manicured grounds, sipping champagne and exchanging polite small talk while a string quartet provided a refined backdrop. I lingered near the refreshment table, nursing a glass of lemonade and scanning the crowd for any sign of Avery. If I was going to expose Loretta's machinations, I needed her granddaughter on my side. "There you are." Loretta's saccharine voice cut through the din as she materialized at my elbow, her perfectly coiffed hair and impeccable pearl ensemble a sharp contrast to the fire burning in her eyes. "I was beginning to think you'd skipped out on us and missed the chance to spend quality time with my favorite family." I countered, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Perish the thought. She fixed me with a withering glare. Watch your tone, Mara. We have appearances to maintain. Is that all you care about? I shot back, unable to contain my mounting frustration. Keeping up your pristine image while you manipulate everyone around you like puppets? Loretta's perfectly sculpted features contorted with rage, her mask of gentility slipping. How dare you speak to me that way? She hissed, leaning in close. After everything I've done for you, ungrateful wretch. Done for me? I laughed bitterly. You mean like driving a wedge between me and my own daughter? Or using me as some pawn in your twisted game to control Avery's inheritance? Her eyes widened fractionally, and I knew I'd struck a nerve. Before she could respond, a familiar figure emerged from the crowd. Gran, everything okay over here? Avery approached us, her brow furrowed with concern as she took in the palpable tension between Loretta and me. Loretta immediately plastered on a sickly sweet smile. Of course, darling. Your grandmother and I were just catching up. I couldn't resist the urge to scoff audibly, drawing Avery's curious gaze. Seizing the opportunity, I pressed on, heedless of Loretta's furious glare. Your grandmother's been keeping secrets from you, Avery, I said, my voice low and intense. About her real reasons for bringing me back into this family. Avery's eyes flicked uncertainly between us as Loretta spluttered indignantly. Don't listen to her lies, sweetheart. She's clearly unwell. But I was on a roll now, propelled by years of pent-up anger and resentment. Fishing the crumpled legal documents from my pocket, I thrust them toward Avery. See for yourself. She's been plotting to use you to control your inheritance and keep her grubby hands on the family fortune. I turned to Loretta, my gaze blazing with righteous fury. You used everyone as your pawns, Loretta, but this is where it ends. A hush fell over the gathering as heads turned in our direction, drawn by the commotion. Loretta's face drained of color, her perfectly composed veneer cracking to reveal the ugliness lurking beneath. Avery stared at the documents in her hands, her expression shifting from confusion to dawning realization as the truth sank in. Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet Loretta's, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Is it true, Gran? She asked, her voice small and tremulous. Have you been lying to me this whole time? For a long, agonizing moment, Loretta said nothing, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Then, with a sigh of resignation, she gave a curt nod. I did what I had to do, she said stiffly, to protect our legacy, our family name. Avery recoiled as if struck, shaking her head in disbelief. You're unbelievable, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. All this time, I thought. Her words trailed off as she turned toward me, a silent apology in her eyes. In that moment, I knew I'd won, not just the battle against Loretta's manipulations, but Avery's trust as well. As the gathering dissolved into hushed whispers and furtive glances, Loretta stood alone, her meticulously constructed facade in ruins around her, the master puppeteer at last unmasked. The gentle tinkle of the bell above the door mingled with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the soft murmur of conversation. I took a moment to savor the warmth and energy of the bustling salon, a contented smile tugging at my lips. Order up for table 4. Avery's voice rang out from the small kitchen area, drawing a chorus of laughter from the group of regulars gathered around one of the cozy bistro tables. It had been 6 months since that fateful evening, when the truth about Loretta's schemes finally came to light. In the aftermath, everything had unraveled with startling swiftness. The strained relationships within the family, the tightly guarded web of control Loretta had so carefully constructed, all of it crumbling like a house of cards. Avery had been my fiercest ally throughout, standing by my side as I navigated the messy legal battles and bitter recriminations that followed. With her support, I'd finally been able to extract myself from the toxic grip of Loretta's influence, emerging stronger and more determined than ever before. And now, here we were, partners in more than just name, having pooled our resources to open this quaint little salon and cafe, a cozy oasis worlds away from the cold opulence of the Blackwood estate. Incoming! Avery called out in mock warning as she deposited a tray laden with steaming mugs and pastries on the table to a round of cheery thanks. I watched her work the room with a natural grace and warmth, effortlessly charming the customers as she topped up coffees and swapped friendly banter. In those unguarded moments, I could see so much of myself in her. The same resilient spirit, the same quiet determination that had carried me through the darkest days of my divorce and estrangement. "We're not just rebuilding our lives, Avery," I murmured, catching her eye as she circled back toward the counter. "We're reclaiming them." She flashed me a conspiratorial grin, sliding an arm around my shoulders in a quick, affectionate squeeze. "You got that right. No more letting other people dictate our story." Her words struck a chord deep within me, a poignant reminder of just how far we'd come. For so long, I'd allowed Loretta's toxicity and manipulation to define my narrative, to strip away my autonomy and sense of self-worth. But not anymore. This salon, this vibrant hub of warmth and community, was a living testament to our perseverance, a reclamation of the life I'd always envisioned for myself and my daughter. A life free from the shadows of bitterness and control that had loomed over us for far too long. As the afternoon stretched on, and the hum of lively conversation and laughter filled the air, I found myself stealing furtive glances at the framed newspaper clipping mounted proudly on the wall. The bold headline, "Family Feud Erupts, Blackwood Empire in Turmoil," felt like a relic from another lifetime, a stark reminder of just how far we'd come. Loretta's once formidable influence had withered in the wake of her exposed machinations, leaving her isolated and diminished, a specter of her former self. The vast fortune and legacy she'd safeguarded so ruthlessly had slipped through her grasping fingers, a fitting cosmic comeuppance for the suffering she'd inflicted. But dwelling on her downfall brought me no satisfaction, no sense of victory or revenge. As I surveyed the cozy warmth of the salon, my gaze settling on Avery's radiant smile, I realized that this, the hard-won bond between mother and daughter, the freedom to forge our own path, was the greatest triumph of all. No more pawns in someone else's game, no more victims of manipulation and control. Just two women, boldly authoring the next chapter of their lives on their own terms. And in that moment, awash in the contentment and possibility that surrounded us, I knew our story was just beginning. Marrying him might have saved my life, but living with him almost destroyed it. Those haunting words echoed in my mind as I stared at the ornate mirror, the golden frame, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within me. It had all started with a chance encounter at a charity gala, where Alex Preston's charming smile and captivating presence had swept me off my feet. A whirlwind courtship followed, filled with lavish dates, heartfelt promises, and the assurance that he was the man of my dreams. Little did I know that underneath that polished exterior lurked a web of deceit so tangled that it would almost suffocate me. "Eliza, darling, are you ready?" Alex's voice drifted through the bedroom door, snapping me back to reality. "Just a minute," I called out, forcing a smile onto my face as I smoothed the silky fabric of my dress. As I stepped out, Alex's eyes raked over me appreciatively. "You look stunning, my love." He leaned in, planting a kiss on my cheek, his familiar cologne enveloping me. The ride to the Preston family estate was filled with idle chatter, but my mind wandered to the events that had brought me here. Barely 6 months ago, I had been a carefree, independent woman, content with my career and social circle. Then Alex swept in, spinning tales of undying love and a future filled with happiness. Little did I know that by accepting his proposal, I was stepping into a gilded cage. The estate loomed before us, its imposing architecture a testament to the family's wealth and prestige. As we entered, a figure emerged from the shadows, her sharp gaze immediately fixing on me. "Vivian, I'd like you to meet my wife, Eliza," Alex said, his voice tinged with pride. Vivian, Alex's older sister, offered a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to the family, Eliza." In that moment, I sensed an undercurrent of tension, a subtle warning that all was not as it seemed within the walls of this grand estate. As the evening progressed, surrounded by Alex's closest friends and business associates, I found myself drowning in a sea of polite conversations and forced smiles. Vivian's calculating glances only added to my growing unease. It wasn't until later, when the guests had dispersed and Alex had retired for the night, that I allowed myself to confront the nagging doubts that had taken root. Seated in the dimly lit library, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had entered a world far more complex and dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The question was, Would I have the strength to untangle myself from this web before it consumed me completely? The grand foyer of the Preston estate should have filled me with awe, but instead, a sense of unease crept over me as I stepped inside my new home. The opulent chandeliers cast a warm glow, yet the atmosphere felt chilly and unwelcoming. "Let me show you around," Alex said, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back as he guided me through the winding corridors. Each room was more extravagant than the last, from the sprawling living area adorned with priceless antiques to the state-of-the-art kitchen that could have belonged in a five-star restaurant. It was a world of wealth and privilege I had never experienced before. "And this will be our bedroom," Alex announced, pushing open a set of double doors to reveal a lavish suite that could have easily accommodated a small palace. As I took in the plush furnishings and the breathtaking view from the floor-to-ceiling windows, a movement in the corner of my eye caught my attention. Vivian stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her gaze piercing. "Impressive, isn't it?" she remarked, her tone laced with sarcasm. "I hope you'll be comfortable here, Eliza." Before I could respond, Alex stepped forward, his demeanor shifting from doting husband to protective brother. "Vivian, I thought we discussed this. Eliza is my wife now, and she deserves to be treated with respect." Vivian's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw a flicker of contempt cross her features. "Of course, dear brother, I wouldn't dream of making your precious wife feel unwelcome." With a curt nod, she turned on her heel and disappeared down the hallway, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. "Don't mind her," Alex murmured, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Vivian has always been a little difficult." His touch, once comforting, now felt suffocating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was far more to this sibling rivalry than met the eye. Over the next few weeks, I found myself walking on eggshells, constantly navigating the minefield of tensions that permeated the estate. Vivian's presence was like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over every interaction, her cutting remarks and icy glares leaving me feeling unsettled and unwelcome in my own home. "You shouldn't let her get to you," Alex would say, his reassuring words ringing hollow in the face of Vivian's open hostility. But it wasn't just Vivian's behavior that set my nerves on edge. There were subtle shifts in Alex's demeanor, too. The way he would dismiss my concerns with a wave of his hand, or the way his touch would linger a little too long, as if he were trying to assert his dominance. It was during one of these moments, as he gripped my arm a little too tightly while chastising me for some perceived misstep, that I caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, a flicker of cruelty that sent shivers down my spine. In that instant, I realized that the man I had married was not the charming, loving soul he had pretended to be. There was a darkness lurking beneath the surface, and I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about him. As I lay awake that night, Alex's even breathing beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow become trapped in a gilded cage with no idea how to escape. The sound of raised voices echoed through the study, shattering the usual tranquility of the estate. Curiosity got the better of me as I crept closer, the muffled words becoming clearer. "Can't keep sweeping this under the rug, Alex. The shareholders are getting restless." It was Vivian's voice, sharp and accusatory. My heart raced as I pressed my ear against the door, straining to make out Alex's response. "I have it under control," he snapped, his tone laced with irritation. "The last thing we need is for word to get out about our creative accounting practices." "Creative accounting practices?" My mind whirled as the implications of those words sank in. Could Alex be involved in something illegal? Before I could ponder further, the sound of footsteps approaching sent me scurrying away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I busied myself with straightening the vase on the hallway table, trying to appear nonchalant as Vivian emerged from the study, her face flushed with anger. "Eliza," she said curtly, her gaze sweeping over me with undisguised disdain. "I didn't realize you were lurking about." "I wasn't," I stammered, my palms growing clammy. "I was just passing by." Vivian's eyes narrowed, and for a moment I thought she might call out my lie. But then, her expression softened ever so slightly, and she leaned in closer. "You should be careful, Eliza," she murmured, her voice low and laced with warning. There are things happening in this family that you know nothing about." Before I could respond, she had swept past me, leaving me reeling in her wake. What did she mean by that? Was she implying that Alex was involved in something illegal, something that could put our entire family at risk? The questions swirled in my mind, but I knew better than to confront Alex directly. Instead, I bided my time, keeping my eyes and ears open for any clue that might shed light on the shadows that seemed to be closing in around us. It wasn't long before I stumbled upon my first piece of evidence. Late one night, as Alex worked at his desk in the study, I slipped in under the guise of bringing him a nightcap. As I placed the glass on the desk, a folder caught my eye, a collection of financial statements and ledgers, their pages littered with suspicious-looking entries and crossed-out figures. My heart pounded as I glimpsed the words Shell Corporation and offshore accounts scrawled in the margins. I knew then that my suspicions were well-founded. Alex was involved in something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. As the weeks passed, I became a silent observer, gathering what information I could while maintaining a careful facade of ignorance. Whispered conversations, coded emails, and furtive glances all added to the mounting pile of evidence that pointed to one inescapable truth. My husband was a liar and a cheat, and the very foundation of our marriage was built on deceit. Yet even as the walls closed in around us, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope that perhaps I could find a way to untangle this tangled web before it consumed us both. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast eerie shadows across the room as I pored over the documents scattered on the desk. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, each one revealing a new layer of Alex's deception. Financial statements riddled with discrepancies, emails detailing shady business dealings, and a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. The evidence was damning, and yet a part of me still clung to the hope that there was some innocent explanation, some misunderstanding that could justify the chaos unfolding before my eyes. It was then that the ping of an incoming message shattered the silence, the sound making me jump. Alex's phone vibrated on the nightstand, the screen illuminating with a new notification. Against my better judgment, I reached for it, my heart pounding in my chest. The message was innocuous at first glance. A simple, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow" from a contact labeled Jessica. But as I scrolled further, my breath caught in my throat. Message after message, each one more explicit than the last, painted a clear picture of Alex's infidelity. "Missing your touch. Counting down the hours until I can hold you again. You know how much I crave you." The words blurred together as hot tears stung my eyes. The man I had trusted, the man I had loved with every fiber of my being, had been deceiving me from the start. His promises of devotion were nothing but hollow lies, his vows of fidelity cast aside with callous disregard. The sound of footsteps in the hallway jolted me back to reality, and I scrambled to gather the scattered documents, my hands shaking uncontrollably. In my haste, I knocked over a picture frame, the shattering glass echoing like a gunshot in the stillness of the night. The bedroom door flew open, and there stood Alex, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and fear. "What the hell are you doing?" he snarled, his eyes landing on the incriminating papers clutched in my trembling hands. My voice faltered as I struggled to form a coherent response, the weight of his betrayal crushing me from all sides. Alex's gaze hardened, and he advanced towards me, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator closing in on its prey. "You weren't supposed to see those," he hissed, snatching the documents from my grasp. "Alex, please?" I pleaded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Just tell me the truth." For a moment, his expression softened, and I dared to hope that he might offer an explanation, a chance to salvage the shattered remnants of our relationship. But then, his lips twisted into a cruel smile, and the illusion was shattered. "The truth?" he sneered, leaning in close enough for me to smell the whiskey on his breath. "The truth is, you're nothing but a means to an end, Eliza, a pretty little trophy wife to help me maintain appearances while I take care of business." His words cut deep, each one a razor-sharp blade slicing through the fragile threads that had bound us together. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back, no chance for reconciliation. The man I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a monster driven by greed and deceit. If you breathe a word of this to anyone, Alex continued, his grip tightening around my wrist until I winced in pain, I'll make sure you regret the day you ever crossed me. As he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, I sank to the floor, my body racked with sobs. The world as I knew it had come crashing down around me, leaving me adrift in a sea of lies and broken promises. But even as despair threatened to consume me, a flicker of determination ignited deep within. I would not be a victim, not anymore. It was time to take back control, no matter the cost. The heavy oak door creaked open, and Vivian slipped into the dimly lit library, her eyes scanning the room before settling on me. Eliza, what's going on? Your message sounded urgent. I took a deep breath, steeling my resolve. I know everything, Vivian, about Alex's illegal activities, his offshore accounts, his mistress. Vivian's expression hardened, and for a moment I thought she might deny it all. But then her shoulders sagged, and she sank into the nearest armchair, defeat etched across her features. So, he finally showed his true colors, she muttered, her voice laced with bitterness. I tried to warn you, Eliza, but you were too blinded by his charm to see the monster he really is. You knew? I felt a surge of anger rising within me. You knew what he was up to and you didn't say anything? Vivian's gaze met mine, her eyes filled with a mixture of remorse and determination. I had my suspicions, but I could never get my hands on any solid proof. That snake always covered his tracks too well. Well, now we have the proof, I said, sliding the stack of incriminating documents across the table towards her. And we're going to use it to bring him down. Vivian's perfectly manicured brows arched in surprise. We? You want to take over the company, don't you? I pressed on, my voice gaining strength with each word. Well, this is our chance. Together, we can expose Alex's misdeeds and get him out of the way for good. A slow smile spread across Vivian's face, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of respect in her eyes. I have to admit, I underestimated you, Eliza. You've got more fire in you than I gave you credit for. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. All right, let's do this, but we have to be smart about it. Alex is a snake, and he'll stop at nothing to protect his precious empire. Over the next few days, Vivian and I pored over the evidence, meticulously cataloging every shred of proof, every damning email and suspicious transaction. It was a delicate dance, carefully planning our next moves while maintaining a facade of normalcy around Alex. The tension in the house was palpable, with Alex constantly on edge, his eyes narrowed in suspicion whenever Vivian and I were in the same room. But we played our parts well, acting the dutiful wife and the supportive sister, all the while plotting his downfall. Are you sure you're ready for this? Vivian asked one night as we finalized our strategy. Once we set this in motion, there's no going back. I thought of Alex's cruel words, the way he had threatened and belittled me, and a steely resolve settled over me. I'm ready. He's going to pay for what he's done, one way or another. The day of the board meeting arrived, and Vivian and I took our seats at the long mahogany table, our game faces firmly in place. Alex strode in, his confidence barely masking the undercurrent of tension that rippled through the room. As he launched into his polished presentation, projecting financial figures and growth projections onto the screen behind him, I caught Vivian's eye. A slight nod was all it took, and we made our move. Actually, Alex, Vivian's voice cut through the air like a knife, I think we should take a closer look at those numbers. Alex faltered, his bravado slipping for just a moment as Vivian began pulling up document after document, laying bare the truth about his misdeeds. The room erupted into chaos, with board members demanding explanations and lawyers scrambling to take notes. Through it all, Alex maintained a veneer of composure, his eyes darting between Vivian and me with a mixture of fury and disbelief. But as the evidence mounted, as the weight of his lies threatened to crush him, the mask finally slipped. You'll pay for this, Eliza, he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. Mark my words, you'll regret the day you crossed me. But as I met his gaze, unflinching, I knew that the power had finally shifted. The tangled web of lies he had woven was unraveling before our very eyes, and there was no escape for the monster at its center. The boardroom descended into chaos as the full extent of Alex's deception was laid bare. Lawyers scribbled furiously, shareholders hurled accusations, and through it all, Alex stood frozen, his face contorted in a mask of fury. How dare you? he snarled, rounding on Vivian and me. "You have no idea what you've done." Vivian met his gaze, unflinching. "We know exactly what we've done, dear brother. We've exposed you for the liar and fraud that you are." A vein throbbed in Alex's temple as he struggled to maintain his composure. "This is all a misunderstanding," he insisted, his voice strained. "I can explain." "Save it, Alex," one of the board members snapped. "The evidence is overwhelming. Your underhanded dealings, the offshore accounts, the financial manipulations. It's all right here in black and white." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, and I could see the panic flickering in Alex's eyes as his carefully constructed facade crumbled around him. "You're making a grave mistake," he warned, his gaze shifting to me. "You'll regret this, Eliza." I squared my shoulders, refusing to be intimidated by his empty threats. "The only mistake was ever trusting you." As security guards moved in to escort him out, Alex lunged forward, his face twisted into an ugly snarl. "You'll pay for this, you little bitch!" Strong arms restrained him, but not before his fist connected with the side of my face, sending stars bursting across my vision. I stumbled backward, clutching my throbbing cheek, as Vivian rushed to my side. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I nodded, blinking back tears of pain and humiliation. "I'm fine. It's nothing compared to what he deserves." As Alex was dragged from the room, his curses and threats echoing down the hallway, a heavy silence settled over the boardroom. It was finally over. The tangled web of lies that had ensnared us all had been severed, and the monster at its center was exposed for the world to see. In the days and weeks that followed, the fallout from Alex's downfall rippled outward, like shockwaves from a seismic event. Lawsuits were filed, investigations launched, and the once mighty Preston empire teetered on the brink of collapse. Through it all, Vivian remained a steadfast ally, guiding the company through the turbulent waters with a deft hand. Together, we worked tirelessly to salvage what remained, to rebuild the tarnished reputation and restore the trust that Alex had so carelessly squandered. It wasn't easy. There were whispers and pointed stares, accusations and innuendo that threatened to drag us down into the mire of scandal. But we persevered, driven by a shared determination to rise from the ashes and forge a new path forward. As for Alex, his world crumbled around him in spectacular fashion. The once charming, larger-than-life figure was reduced to a mere shadow of his former self, his arrogance replaced by desperation as his allies deserted him one by one. I watched from afar as his lavish lifestyle unraveled, his expensive suits traded for prison jumpsuits, his palatial estate seized by the authorities. It was a fate he had brought upon himself, and yet a part of me still felt a twinge of sadness at the sight of his downfall. But that fleeting moment of pity was quickly overshadowed by a sense of triumph and relief. The nightmare was finally over. The tangled web that had ensnared me was no more, and I was free to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me. As I stood in the doorway of my new apartment, taking in the simple furnishings and the warm sunlight streaming through the windows, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind and forge a new path on my own terms. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. I was no longer a victim, no longer a pawn in someone else's twisted game. I was a survivor, a warrior who had stared down the darkness and emerged victorious. And as I stepped out into the world, head held high, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the same unwavering resilience that had carried me through the storm. The headline screamed Alex's downfall, plastered across every newspaper and news channel in the country. Business mogul exposed as fraud, Preston empire crumbles amidst scandal, each headline more sensational than the last. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the sordid details of his misdeeds, a part of me still couldn't believe how swiftly everything had unraveled. Just weeks ago, Alex had been the picture of success, a titan of industry with the world at his feet. Now he was a disgraced pariah, his name synonymous with deceit and corruption. The real surprise, however, came in the form of the public's reaction. Instead of sympathy or outrage on his behalf, there was a pervasive sense of schadenfreude, a collective glee at witnessing the fall of a man who had lived so ostentatiously, so arrogantly. He had it coming, one commentator declared on a primetime news program. A man like that, with his penchant for excess and his blatant disregard for the rules, was bound to come crashing down eventually. As the days passed, the avalanche of negative publicity only intensified. Former business associates and allies distanced themselves, scrambling to salvage their own reputations. Even Alex's closest confidants turned on him, offering damning testimonies in exchange for leniency from the authorities. Through it all, Vivian remained a steadfast presence by my side, guiding the company through the turbulent waters with a deft hand. Together, we worked tirelessly to reshape the narrative, to restore the trust and credibility that had been shattered by Alex's actions. It wasn't an easy task. There were skeptics at every turn, those who doubted our ability to rise from the ashes of such a colossal scandal. But Vivian was relentless, her determination fueled by a burning desire to reclaim her family's legacy. This company was built on generations of hard work and integrity, she declared in a press conference, her steely gaze fixed on the cameras. We will not allow one man's greed and hubris to tarnish that. As the legal proceedings unfolded, Alex's once formidable empire crumbled around him. Assets were seized, bank accounts frozen, and his lavish lifestyle reduced to a mere memory. Gone were the designer suits and luxury cars, replaced by the drab uniforms and sterile confines of a prison cell. I caught glimpses of him during the highly publicized trial, his once confident demeanor replaced by a haunted, defeated expression. It was a far cry from the charming, charismatic figure who had once swept me off my feet, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity amidst the overwhelming sense of vindication. But that fleeting moment of empathy was quickly overshadowed by the memories of his cruelty, the way he had manipulated and betrayed me without a shred of remorse. This was the fate he had chosen for himself, and he would have to live with the consequences. As the final gavel fell, sealing Alex's fate with a lengthy prison sentence, a palpable sense of relief washed over me. The nightmare was finally over, the tangled web of lies that had ensnared me severed for good. In the aftermath, Vivian stepped forward to assume the mantle of leadership, her steady hand guiding the company through the turbulent waters of rebranding and restructuring. Under her guidance, the once tarnished empire began to regain its footing, slowly but surely clawing its way back to respectability. As for me, I found solace in the simplicity of my new life. Gone were the lavish trappings and the constant scrutiny that had once been my reality. In their place was a newfound sense of freedom, a chance to start anew without the suffocating weight of Alex's lies and manipulations. It wasn't an easy journey, of course. There were moments of doubt and vulnerability, times when the ghosts of the past threatened to drag me back into the darkness. But each time, I drew strength from the knowledge that I had survived, that I had emerged from the fire stronger and more resilient than ever before. As the months passed, the wounds began to heal, and a newfound sense of clarity took root. I was no longer defined by the trauma of my past, no longer a victim of circumstances beyond my control. I was a survivor, a warrior who had stared down the abyss and emerged victorious. And as I stepped out into the world, head held high, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with the same unwavering determination that had carried me through the storm. The sun filtered through the sheer curtains, bathing my new apartment in a warm, golden glow. It was a far cry from the opulent grandeur of the Preston estate, but as I sipped my morning coffee, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was my sanctuary, my safe haven from the chaos and turmoil of the past. Gone were the lavish trappings and the suffocating weight of expectation. In their place was a simple, uncluttered existence, a life of my own making, free from the tangled web of lies and manipulation that had once threatened to consume me. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my reverie, and I padded across the hardwood floor to answer it. Vivian stood on the other side, her signature power suit traded for a casual sundress, her face radiant with a genuine smile. "Good morning," she greeted me warmly, enveloping me in a sisterly embrace. "I thought I'd stop by and see how you're settling in." I ushered her inside, marveling at how far our relationship had come. Months ago, we had been adversaries, caught in the crosshairs of Alex's deceit. Now, we were allies, bound by a shared experience that had forged an unbreakable bond of trust and respect. It's perfect, I assured her, gesturing around the cozy living room. Simple, but perfect. Vivian nodded, her eyes sweeping over the space with a critical but approving gaze. I'm glad. You deserve a fresh start, Eliza, a chance to rebuild your life on your own terms. We settled onto the plush sofa, and I couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in Vivian's demeanor. Gone was the sharp, calculating persona she had once worn like armor. In its place was a warmth and vulnerability that I had never seen before. How are things at the company? I asked, sipping my coffee. Vivian's smile faltered ever so slightly, a hint of weariness creeping into her expression. It's been a challenge, to say the least. Rebuilding the brand, restoring trust with our partners and shareholders, it's been an uphill battle. But you're doing it, I reassured her. You're turning things around, slowly but surely. A spark of pride flickered in her eyes, and she nodded resolutely. Yes, we are. It's not easy, but I'm determined to reclaim our family's legacy, to show the world that the Preston name still stands for something. As we lapsed into comfortable silence, I couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey we had both undertaken. From the depths of despair and betrayal, we had risen like phoenixes from the ashes, emerging stronger and more resilient than ever before. The legal battles had been grueling, the emotional toll nearly overwhelming at times. But through it all, we had remained resolute, steadfast in our determination to see justice served and our lives restored. And now, as I looked around my humble abode, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. Gratitude for the strength that had carried me through the darkest of times, and for the unwavering support of the woman who had become more than just an ally. She was family, in the truest sense of the word. Eliza, Vivian's voice broke the silence, her tone earnest. I know words can never undo the trauma you endured, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am for not seeing the truth sooner. I reached out, squeezing her hand reassuringly. You have nothing to apologize for, Vivian. We were both caught in Alex's web of lies. The important thing is that we found our way out, together. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips, and she nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of gratitude and understanding. In that moment, I knew that the scars of the past would never fully fade. The memories of Alex's cruelty, the bitter taste of betrayal, would always linger in the shadows of my mind. But I had emerged from the darkness stronger and more resilient than ever before. As I bid farewell to Vivian and settled back into the comfort of my new home, I couldn't help but feel a profound sense of hope for the future. The tangled web that had once threatened to strangle me was severed, the monster at its center vanquished, and I was free to chart my own course. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of excitement rather than trepidation. I was no longer a victim, defined by the trauma of my past. I was a survivor, a warrior who had stared down the abyss and emerged victorious. And as I gazed out at the bustling city skyline, a world of possibilities stretched before me, waiting to be embraced with open arms.